The story starts from the moment when the protagonist asked someone if he wanted to kill her, but the white-haired guy to whom the heroine addressed didn't even understand what she meant. The girl with blue hair continued talking, telling him that she wanted it to be painless. The blonde came closer to the protagonist and, leaning over, asked her what she was saying, because he was her faithful servant. However, even such words did not stop the heroine. She was only surprised by the words, but was actually angry with him. The girl carefully looked at the servant so that his silhouette was reflected in her blue, heavenly eyes. In front of her, the protagonist really sees an ordinary servant. But it's not like that because she knows the future. She already knows that in the future this faithful blonde man will attack her, making her suffer and scream in pain. Because of this, the protagonist of the story is certain that he is the worst type of character she can think of. Taking a serious look at the servant, the heroine told him to forget about magic, because it would be better for him that way. The aristocrat's words so surprised the loyal servant that he didn't know what to say, continuing to stare at her. Thinking that it was a joke, the guy waved the girl in the bed with his hand and told her that she could joke well. But the heroine wasn't joking. She knows that she woke up in this world a few days ago and lives in a novel called Crown of Dawn. The protagonist has been reborn into a book of a novel she is familiar with, and so she knows what the blonde man is up to. The thing is that in her past life, the girl read this novel to her sick sister, and it seemed uninteresting to her. She even recalls that she read it more than once, as her sister needed something to entertain her. Her own life began when she was adopted by a family who could not have children. However, they soon had a child of their own, that is, the protagonist's sister, whom they were very much looking forward to. But when the protagonist's sister was born, she was constantly in the hospital, as she was very weak. And only because of this mom and dad blamed the girl that supposedly it was all because of her, and she should be ashamed. The main character remembers that since then she was poorly fed, beaten, and yelled over her without showing love. Her parents constantly taught her that her whole life should be devoted to her sick and crazy sister. Because of this, the heroine could not start something to study on her own will and could not even find her own job. She recalls how she was going to school, realizing that everything had already been decided for her for the benefit of her sick sister. There were times when the heroine hated her sister, but when she visited her, she sympathized with her more because of her sadness. Because of this, their relationship was unstable and not strong. They were often angry at each other, and sometimes they made up. It all ended when the sick sister died. All that was left of her were her ashes in an urn. After this need in the heroine stopped, and her parents quickly kicked her out of the house for the fact that she badly followed her sister. And when the girl found herself on the side of the road, where there were many people, she realized that she did not want to live. To die, she climbed a tall high-rise from which she looked down while rain poured from the sky. Directly below her was a pile of rebar and old iron pipes that she had to fall on. As the thunderstorm only grew worse, the heroine asked herself how she would be now if she only existed for the sake of others. She slowly took off her sneakers, thinking that she was too tired to think about anything and fight. After she took off her shoes, the girl walked to the edge of the building, thinking that she was really tired of it all. She remembered the face of her sick sister, who always wore a mask, and realized that she was the one who had threatened her life. Carefully remembering the eyes of her sister, the heroine does not understand why only this weak figure remained in her memory. Raindrops dripped on the girl's head as she wondered if her sister could have been a little better for her. She looked up at the full moon and wondered to her dead sister, couldn't she have gotten better for her? But the protagonist was already walking up the stairs, thinking that none of that mattered to her anymore. Drenched from the rain, the girl stood on the edge of the building, relaxing her shoulders and realizing that this was already her end. However, she didn't even realize that the puddle reflected not exactly her, but her new body in another world. The girl had left her sneakers on the roof of the building to soak in the rain, as a symbol of true loneliness and longing. But in the puddle that the sneakers had accumulated under them, you could see two moons at once, as if magic was about to happen. It was this strange phenomenon that the heroine saw. But she did not care anymore, since she was already falling down from the high-rise. However, after death, the protagonist found herself in a bright place, surprisingly having beautiful blue eyes. After opening her eyes, the girl realized that she had a feeling that she was reborn into another world, better than that one. The heroine also noticed that the maid in her room began to open the curtains as it was already morning. On the table for the girl already stood different desserts with berries, which were also decorated with a necklace of stones. The protagonist lay on the bed and wondered if it was too bright while the maids were working around her. But as soon as the heroine moved, a red-haired maid looked at her and noticed it. The maid came up to the heroine and shouted to her if she was awake, which made the girl feel like she was about to bleed from her ears. After a while in the castle where the heroine was, everyone found out that she had woken up from what was probably a long sleep. A lot of servants were running around the corridors, overhearing that the family in the heroine's room was already trying to call for a girl named Selena. There was also a large chandelier in the bedroom that brightly illuminated the entire beautiful room of the main character, Selena. In front of her were her father, mother, and brother. The heroine's mother tearfully told her that she had fallen down the stairs 4 days ago. The reborn heroine's brother looked at his sister, saying her name affectionately with excitement and worry. And Selena's father put his hand on his mother's shoulder and said that they all missed her greatly and worried about her health. But the heroine herself could not realize who these people in front of her were, so she just looked at them without saying anything. In addition, Selena realized that she could not speak when she tried to say a word, but for some reason she could not. This made the girl's entire new family horrified. They looked at her in shock, frightened for her condition. But the worried family was immediately visited by the palace doctor, who said it was normal, as she had been in bed for days. The aristocrats went on to say that Selena needed rest soon, while the heroine couldn't understand one thing. The protagonist looked closely at the young boy and realized that this was Selena's brother, Aaron Howitt. Also looking at the excited couple next to her, the girl realized that most likely it was her parents, Duke and Duchess Howitt. Looking up at the ceiling, the girl realized that after her suicide, she had become Selena Howitt from the novel she was reading to her sister. This made the girl wonder where the real Selena might be then, if she had been reborn into her. It was obvious by the girl that all these questions worried her, making her frown, but she wouldn't be able to find out everything so easily. And after that, she fell back into bed, realizing something that she didn't feel much like thinking about at the moment. Meanwhile, outside the bedroom door, the maids had already brought the heroine food for the occasion of her awakening. The 2 maids entered the bedroom with the food, alerting Selena with a smile that they had brought dinner for her. The protagonist decided to sit down at the table and grab a fork and knife, but she was surprised by the sheer amount of food that was on the table. There were really a lot of dishes on the table just for Selena, including fried meat, scrambled eggs, sandwiches, salads, and other things. However, the heroine still decided to eat it all, even though she thinks it's all too much for just one person. Time passed and gradually changed day by day. In the courtyard of the ducal palace, servants and knights wandered around, and in the protagonist's room, which had a window overlooking the branches of the trees, she never stopped trying to speak. She moved her jaw, realizing that it had been days since her rebirth, and she was still wheezing. Suddenly, Selena's dad and mom decided to walk in. They had a smile on their face as they greeted their daughter. Selena's mother walked closer to the girl, asking her how she was feeling while the heroine looked on. Fixing her hair behind her ear, the girl was able to clearly say the words and reply to her parents that she was fine now. What was evident from the heroine's mother was that she was overjoyed. She smiled as if this was a real happiness in life for her. Taking her daughter by the hand, mom and dad of the main character admitted to her that they were very worried, especially for her voice. However, unlike her new parents, Selena was not so joyful, which was evident on the faces of the heroes. This is because the silent heroine is not yet accustomed to calling people who sees for the first time her parents or relatives. After the girl's parents sat closer to her, Selena decided to ask them where they were now. But that wasn't the only thing the girl was worried about. Looking at herself with uncertainty, she wondered who she really was. Suddenly, the protagonist remembered the moment when she ordered the blonde to forget about magic, to which he with a set in his hands was surprised. At that moment, the protagonist added to her words that it would be better for him. The guy still did not understand the words of the mistress. The heroine perfectly recalls the fact that the same blonde stood near the window, not understanding what to answer the young duchess. He looked at her with bewilderment and some sadness, asking her why she was talking to him like that. It was to this window that Selena looked, remembering all this she had said to the mysterious, faithful servant. Meanwhile, the heroine's parents answered her that they were her parents, the Duke and Duchess of Hovite, and this was their home. The girl continued to listen to them, even when her mother told her that they were a loving family that had always been together. The heroine then took her head to the side as her mom asked her if she remembered Lucas or Ariel's maid or the maids. Selena got all giddy when her mother mentioned a certain party. Turns out the heroine knows something about it. In fact, she only knows about it due to having read the novel in a previous life for her sister. Imagining everything she knows from the book, the heroine remembered that the villain from that novel was definitely named Selena. But suddenly the girl was distracted from her thoughts by the blonde man, whose name she doesn't remember, who told her that it was tea time. At this point, the girl, thanks to the novel, remembered that he was an orphan who was often beaten on the street. Also, the heroine of the story knows that in the novel, Selena made this blonde man her slave, taking advantage of him in many things. Remembering his smile, the girl remembers that he was not devoted to Selena, so he just floated on the stream of life. But in the end, he became the first in the novel who betrayed the villain and tried to kill her with his own hand. This makes the protagonist disgusted. Having realized all this, the heroine had only to look indignantly at the subject, knowing the fact that in the future he may kill her. Not wanting to see him, the heroine waved her hand, saying that she wanted to sleep, after which the blonde only bowed. The heroine also turned to the other servants and told them that she was feeling better and they should go. After that, the blonde man and the others, like sad puppies, left the heroine's bedroom, seeing her off with sad looks. So the protagonist of the story was left alone, when in her room on the wall fell bright and saturated sunlight. The girl lay in bed and thought about something of her own, when all around her was only silence and the pleasant light of the sun. She decided to fall into her bed again, as she was still too lazy to start doing anything. The heroine fidgeted on her bed, saying to herself, she liked the soft bed that Selena usually slept on. The girl in the villain's body continued to stare at the ceiling, thinking about how she didn't want to leave this room at all. The protagonist's mind was both full of thoughts and empty musings at the same time. She continued to stare at the ceiling. She held out her hand in front of her, looking at it and not realizing the fact that this had all happened to her and she had become Selena. Remembering the name of the villain of the novel, the girl also remembered the fact that Selena herself was an evil woman. She was very jealous of her brother, to whom the duchy was to be passed on, so she tried in every possible way to also stand out. The heroine knows, thanks to the novel, that Selene did not have enough talent for her to satisfy her desires. However, the smiling Aaron, unlike her, was an outstanding student who could do anything he wanted. Remembering also the mysterious man with long hair, the heroine realized that the past Selena was envious of her brother. This is how she enchanted her brother into the protagonist of the novel, falling in love with the holy maiden Ariel. The heroine knows that the villainess managed to melt her brother's heart to Ariel, but her happiness did not last long. Selena was quickly imprisoned in a dungeon when Ariel's allies learned of what the villainess had done to her. Those who imprisoned the girl were the same mysterious, long-haired man and his white-haired partner. Soon, Selena in the novel failed to get what she wanted and died of illness at the age of 20 in the dungeon. Thinking back on it all, the new Selena realized that the villainess had a rather foolish but cruel fate. Selena continued to lie on her bed and stare at the ceiling, telling herself that it was better than dying in a dungeon due to illness. The heroine was also looking at the interior of the bedroom, where there were clocks and lamps, realizing that she didn't want anything at all. Looking up, the girl decided that from now on she would just live without thinking about death, because she had no ambitions. She stretched out on the soft bed, realizing that she had never had a life of her own, or any purpose in it at all. She remembered that high rise in her past life and told herself that she had jumped off it without hesitation or doubt because she had nothing to lose. As the sunlight streamed into her bedroom, she couldn't stop wondering why God had chosen her for rebirth. The girl covered her face from the sunlight with her hand, saying that this was all causing her too much trouble. She decided to roll over on her side so she couldn't see the light and fall asleep, trying to gain with renewed strength to live. She slowly drifted into sleep from exhaustion and lethargy, not realizing what she was about to dream. The first thing she saw in her dream was a machine that read the heartbeat and pulse of her sick sister in the hospital. The heroine remembers her half-sister lying in bed with a breathing mask on, not even opening her eyes. And the protagonist only stared silently at the one who was the reason she didn't get freedom, love, and more. Unlike her, who stood far away from her sister, the parents of the sick one were constantly by her side, not believing that she had passed away. When the girl realized that it was all a dream, she noticed her seriously ill sister's eyes opened and lit up slightly. But the girl's sister only opened her eyes slightly, as if trying to close them again because of the final powerlessness and pain. When her sister died, the heroine didn't shed a tear, unlike her parents who sobbed over it. In fact, the girl thought only of the fact that her duties of caring for her sister were finally over. She remembers lightly taking her sister's sore hand, holding it with the palm of her hand, and as if saying goodbye to her forever. Meanwhile, the hand of the villainess in the novel was not pretty either. It was covered in blood, showing all the suffering. The worst villain of the novel was lying on the cold dungeon floor, while sweat dripped off her face due to her illness. At one point, Selena decided to get up to crawl up to the bars because of her horrible and deadly condition. As the villain crawled, the soul of the heroine looked at her on the other side of the grate and knew that this was the last moment of the villain's life. But the antagonist of the novel was so weak and helpless that she saw no one around her in the dungeon. With her bloody hands, Selena gripped the bars, about to call out for help one last time. She barely reached out, screaming for someone to help her, or at least come over, but no one could be heard. Reaching forward even harder, Selena screamed with all her might, begging for someone to help her. With her bloody hands leaving scratches on the floor, she continued to call out for at least someone to help her. She curled into herself, begging for someone to stand up for her and forgive her, but it was all to no avail. The villainess lay on the floor, realizing the fact that she didn't want to die so pathetic and alone with blood all over her body. But she decided to pull herself up once more, looking ahead in hopes of someone walking towards her. With her bloody, dirty hand, she covered her mouth, holding back a cough that was also bloody. After her lips were all bloody from the disease, she realized that there was no way she wanted to die like this here. She continued to lie on the stone floor, repeating the fact that she terribly did not want to die here alone and in pain. As drops of blood dripped from her mouth, she hysterically realized and told herself that she was just a horrible person. As she lowered her face into a pool of her own blood, the villain of the novel never tired of telling herself that she was a true monster. It seemed that when Selena's last hope for salvation had faded, an unusual glow appeared right in front of her. The blue light gave the villain of the novel the same longing and pain she felt while lying in her cell. It grew brighter and brighter, illuminating her in the dungeon and also illuminating her bloody footprints that led to her bars. This light meant that the rain-soaked protagonist of the story appeared right in front of the girl. She looked at the villain of the novel in the dungeon, with her hair wet from the downpour, and realized that it was horrible. Because of the raindrops, a puddle appeared right under the heroine, which reflected the 2 moons she had seen before she died. The girl looked at the exhausted villainess Selena and could not understand. Was that why she had called her here? As if talking to her, the heroine told Selena that when she was on the brink, she definitely wanted someone to stand up for her. The heroine continued to stare at the villainess, asking her if she wanted the protagonist to grant her wish. As she sat down on the floor, the heroine continued her monologue, thinking that Selena had summoned her so that her death wouldn't be so miserable. Meanwhile, Selena herself was just lying on the stone floor, no longer showing signs of life, and the protagonist herself moved closer to her, saying that in that case she would do what Selena so desired. Imagining that the villain herself touches the palm of the protagonist's hand, the protagonist of the story realized that she now lives in her body. After such a dream, Selena suddenly woke up, not realizing why this was all swirling around in her head. Once again, she rose slightly from the bed, looking around the interior and thinking about all that she had dreamed. Leaning on her arm, the girl realized that she would now have to live in this world again for one boring day. After a while, the protagonist was already outside, thinking about whether it was strange to listen to the requests of the dead. Selena was nonchalantly eating cookies in the garden, lying on the bedding and realizing that now she had more problems. She recalls that after this dream, she decided to start a good life, and with these thoughts, she left the chambers. However, when she was packing everything for the picnic, she was constantly stopped by the maids who wanted to help her. In the end, the girl had to pack herself while all the maids begged to be allowed to at least help her. After that, she lay in the garden, pondering why she needed so many servants who would give her no peace. Surrounded by delicious food, the girl talked to herself, saying she didn't care if the original villain died because of herself. While a bird sang on her head, the protagonist herself was thinking about how she doesn't care about the real Selena, who was no longer there for her. The girl was admiring the sky along with the blossoming trees, enjoying the pleasant weather. She decided to take a little nap, causing her to close her eyes while a sparrow continued to sit on her head. However, the heroine was prevented from falling asleep so easily by a strange noise, as if someone was swinging their sword sideways. It even made the protagonist's hair ruffle in the breeze. She caught the noise, but didn't realize what it was. Removing the cookie crumbs from her lips, she thought to herself that someone was definitely here if it was so noisy in the quiet garden. However, the protagonist decided to continue lying on the bedding, realizing that this was her residence, and nothing like that could happen here. But when she took a second attempt to fall asleep along with the bird, she still heard those strange noises. The girl even got up, looking into the distance, and did not understand why it was so noisy in the garden and what it was in general. To find out the truth, the heroine decided to creep closer to the source of the sound in the middle of the bushes and in the company of a chickadee. Raising her head, the surprised protagonist and her little friend saw an interesting person. The girl watched as the long-haired man practiced swinging a heavy sword, trying hard at it. There were even drops of sweat dripping from his face as he looked away and continued practicing. The main character looked at him in surprise as she didn't expect to see this man here for such an activity. Selena continued to watch as the white-haired knight swung his sword hard as he honed his skills. He continued to learn different sword-fighting techniques while making an angry, focused look. After all this, the knight lowered his sword, making noises that made the heroine unable to sleep earlier. Serena looked at him and didn't hide, not knowing if they had a special training ground and why he was ignoring her. After looking at the man, the protagonist decided to crawl away from him, wanting to find a new place to sleep. But she could not do this, because her long hair clearly caught on something, which made her angry. The girl realized that her curls were tangled in the branches. She continued to hold her hair in slight pain. She looked at the bush her hair was tangled in and couldn't understand why it was so soft and tender. After the heroine tried to free her hair from the branches herself, she realized that she wouldn't be able to do it alone. And because of this, she decided to call the long-haired knight for help. He heard a suspicious voice and became suspicious. The man looked around, not realizing where he had just heard a woman's voice calling him. The knight angrily and carefully looked in every bush, but could not find the heroine, who was literally a couple steps away from him. Selena even had to say once more that she was here for the warrior to finally find her in the bushes. But that only made the knight even more wary, thinking that there were enemies or intruders around. He pointed his sword forward, not even realizing that he is not threatened by anyone, but the girl is calling for help. What surprised the protagonist even more was that instead of finding her, the knight went the other way. Having lost sight of him, the heroine raised her head, looking for him, and not realizing where he could have disappeared so abruptly. Even the little chick that sat on the heroine's head was startled by the fact that now the knight with the sword could not even be heard. However, it immediately flew off the perplexed girl's head when it sensed danger and fear. The protagonist's eyes looked up because she was covered by the shadow of the one who had suddenly appeared in front of her. Right in front of the heroine, folding his arms, stood a sullen knight who looked at her with the same angry look. The girl was even frightened by his sudden appearance, from which she twitched her hand as if a bear or a monster had appeared in front of her. Meanwhile, in the castle of the ducal family also took place interesting events, indirectly related to the heroine. Blondie, who was forbidden by the heroine to use magic, was enjoying a strawberry cake, which he loves very much. But the joy of the cake was interrupted by the thought that it was Mrs. Selena who allowed him to eat the cake and take a break from work. As he was about to taste a piece of cake, the servant asked himself what the noblewoman Selena was doing right now. Meanwhile, Lady Selena was indeed doing something interesting. The knight was apologizing to her for not noticing her right away. The heroine reacted calmly, asking him if he could help her untangle her hair from the branches of the bush. The girl's offer surprised the warrior, which was evident from his perplexed but not surprised face. However, to the protagonist's surprise, the first thing he did was to smile very broadly and slyly right in front of her. It turns out that he only laughed a little because of the whole situation, covering his face with his hand from embarrassment. Serena only looked at him with a face like she would eagerly wait for him to calm down and help her. The long-haired knight stopped laughing after all, revealing a cute and harmless face to his interlocutor. The heroine continued to stare at her savior with slight displeasure, trying to remember his name, for she had definitely read his name in the novel. Looking closely at his handsome face, she remembered that he was definitely an elite rider in the duchy. The girl looked at him and couldn't remember his name. She called him over to her, referring to him as the jolly gentleman. To this, the slightly perturbed knight replied that his name was Lucas. The slight anger even made the veins in his face protrude. The heroine continued to look at him and lay in the grass, telling him that she needed help as her hair was tangled. Placing his hand on her chest, Lucas told the aristocrat that he would be happy to help her with the problem. As if saluting the protagonist, Lucas looked at her and called her Duchess Selena Hovite. But the handsome, responsive man did not surprise the heroine, because of which she continued to look at him, thanking him for his help. After that, Lucas got to work, while the protagonist looked at his efforts and labor over her hair. But Lucas did everything without further ado. He continued to untangle the heroine's hair, doing it carefully and gently, and Selena just yawned with fatigue, waiting for the silent man to do his work. But at this time, while Lucas was looking at her, he realized that the Duchess of Hovite was not worthy of being an aristocrat. The sunlight was falling on the face of the protagonist. She was sleepily telling her new acquaintance that the weather was perfect today. There were indeed no dark clouds in the sky. The sky was studded with white clouds like absorbent cotton. And sometime after all the events, the girl was already in different clothes and going about her business. A few hours ago, she watched as Lucas diligently untangled her hair from the branches without saying anything. He was untangling literally every lock of the girl's hair without tearing out the main character's soft and precious hair. But he also looked at her with disdain, while the heroine herself was ready to sink into sleep. Lucas pictured the heroine in his mind and remembered the fact that she had turned 19 this year. He also remembered the fact that everyone in the Hovai family was benevolent, except for the villainous Selena, who was always disgruntled. Thinking about the coat of arms of the ducal family as well, Lucas couldn't understand why exactly she was so after the inheritance. He remembered well her temper and her screams when she found out that her brother would receive the inheritance and not her. But that wasn't enough for her, because she continued to pursue Ariel's girlfriend, who was her brother's girlfriend. Remembering Aaron's smile, Lucas realized that if the wedding had taken place, the heroine's brother would definitely get the inheritance. Continuing to look at Selena, Lucas realized the fact that she is not a pleasant person. The other dukes also thought the same about her. He continued to untangle the girl's hair, thinking about Ariel keeping quiet just to keep the gossip at bay. Looking at the heroine falling asleep, Lucas somehow realized that she was not suitable for the role of a duchess. The man continued to think about the main character, looking at her sleepy, serene state. He couldn't take his eyes off her, suspecting something was wrong if she was so calm today. Lucas held her hair in his hands, assuming that something else had changed about her, besides the fact that she had lost her memory. Lucas also realizes that the former Selena would have screamed and burned everything out of anger, but that's not happening. Turning away from the girl for a moment, Lucas thought that perhaps it was for the best for the principality. Looking away, Lucas couldn't help but think that it would be good for everyone if Selena's memory didn't return. As he finished his work, the knight noticed the fact that the girl's weakened head almost fell to the ground from falling asleep in the garden. However, the girl was awakened by Lucas's words that he had finally finished helping her. Lifting her head closer to Lucas, the first thing the girl did was thank him, looking straight into the silent knight's eyes. The words of gratitude made the man on the contrary become more cheerful and pleasant. A nice smile appeared on his face. The heroine was a little surprised by the smile of the warrior, but she continued to look at him with calmness and callousness, because the girl realizes that in the story, Lucas is the one who will truly fall in love with the maiden Ariel. In the story, they became a couple when Ariel fell into Selena's trap, and after that, she ditched Aaron and fell in love with Lucas. However, looking Lucas in the eyes, the heroine is sure that for the time being, he perceives Ariel as an ordinary classmate. Because of this, the protagonist realized that this is a chance to get closer to him for the sake of having him at her funeral. Taking Lord Lucas by the hand, the girl suddenly addressed him by name, which greatly surprised the warrior. The heroine was not afraid to look her new acquaintance in the eyes, telling him that if he liked her, he could not hide it. Selena deliberately approached Lucas as close as possible to impress him, but it turns out the girl didn't even have the thought of kissing him. She whispered to him, offering to be his friend. The girl's offer surprised Lucas so much that it was as if his face read shock, disappointment, or excitement. After that, the heroine immediately introduced Lucas in his own armor, which was clearly devastated. The girl also imagined her own coffin, suggesting that if Lucas had grieved for her, her death would not have been so miserable. Imagining Lucas even throwing her a flower on the coffin lid, she realized that she must have a lot of friends just for that. Closing her eyes, she realizes that she's doing all this just so that past Selena won't be in a terrible loneliness. But the protagonist's thoughts were interrupted by Lucas's response. Looking at her, he said that they can't be friends. To this, the heroine reacted calmly, saying that in that case there was nothing she could do. The couple was silent, looking at each other and not knowing what to do next. Lucas looked at his companion, who looked very sad. Lucas frowned at the heroine, who stood up from her seat, shaking off the dirt with her hands. As she was about to leave, Selena told Lucas that she still wouldn't stop wanting it. The warrior only bowed to her. After that, the heroine of the story left while Lucas looked at her, clearly not indifferent to all this. When the girl left, but sighed heavily, as if he had just felt relief after the tension, and the protagonist herself walked through the garden, which had trees, thick foliage, and bushes soaking up the sunlight. Selena looked up at the branches of the trees and thought about whether she and Lucas could truly become friends. The girl immediately remembered herself in the past with the soft toy, thinking about how she had always been lonely. She remembers that even from her high school days, she was taking care of her little sister while the rest of them were having fun and making friends. Even when the heroine grew up and tried to become part of society, nothing changed, and her parents forbade her to be friends with anyone. She remembers how her mother was always angry with her, saying that she should take care of her sister and not make friends. There were times when her mother would bring the protagonist to look at her little sister on purpose, asking if she felt sorry for her. The protagonist was constantly pointed at and told that just because of her sick sister, she should not have a good life. Feeling devastated, she had nothing else to do but apologize to her mother and comply. Her parents manipulated her with a smile, forcing her to take care of her sister, or else they promised to get rid of her. Because of this, the girl already felt the way she was being thrown to the bottom as a helpless and unnecessary toy. There was only darkness and loneliness around the protagonist as she wallowed in sadness and emptiness. But now Selena was just breathing in the air in the garden and realizing that despite all this, she called them parents. As a result, the heroine continued to stroll, thinking that she understood perfectly well why Lucas refused her. She constantly replayed in her head how she got close to him, from which Lucas was greatly surprised. With these thoughts, the girl came to a tall building with a red roof, which she looked up at. From the strong and bright light, she covered her eyes with her hand, still looking at the bell tower. Even her eyes could see the outline of the bell tower as the heroine continued to think about how troublesome it all was. The heroine remembered that in her past life, she was very fond of playing games on the computer in secret from her parents. And there was also a popular game among her friends at school who were always talking about her, and she would eavesdrop on them. When the girl decided to play it for the first time, she immediately faced a strong monster when she herself was weak. And because of that, she died in the game from its first attack, which made the hand that held the sword weaken. What surprised the girl was that her character's health was immediately destroyed with just one monstrosity strike. She will remember that this finally diminished her interest in the game, and after that, she turned off the computer. And now, as the heroine walked up to the bell of the bell tower, she realizes that she feels the same way. She was even talking to herself, trying to convince herself that things were not as bad as she thought. Selena made it to the bell before looking around, lifting her dress off the floor. She leaned against the sickly bell, realizing that if she rang it, everyone in the duchy would instantly flinch. But she also thought of the real Selena, telling her that she couldn't fulfill her wish of having many friends. Already imagining herself in her coffin, she was talking to Selena, confessing that she couldn't make it so that there would be many people at her funeral. Picturing herself in the coffin, she doesn't even believe that anyone will mourn her death as she lies there. Placing her hands on her chest, the girl realized that she was still a little sorry for not being able to be friends with Lucas after all. She walked closer to the edge of the tower, thinking about how even her long life wouldn't change anything in the world. As if for the last time, she lifted her head to the sky, asking the former Selena if this was what she wanted. Looking up to the sky, the heroine vowed to Selena that she would do everything in her power right now. She took a step towards the edge, thinking that she would try to make sure her death wasn't agonizing or painful. She was already standing on the edge of the cliff, resolving to end this once and for all for Selena's sake. The tower is quite high, but that's only to the heroine's advantage because she doesn't want to suffer for long. There was a silent desolation in the girl's eyes, which she probably wanted to end as soon as possible. She closed her eyes, realizing that she was, after all, a duchess in a loving family of aristocrats, and that made her feel better. The heroine pictured her weeping family and realized that at least they would grieve for Selena, who feared loneliness. Looking down, the girl decided that if she chose death, everything would be fine and nothing would change. She looked at the stone road at the bottom of the bell tower and realized that it was high enough for instant death. Selena continued to watch, realizing that it was even better than the last time it rained. The main character took the first step towards death, bending closer to the edge with devastated thoughts. Soon enough, she began to fall downward, realizing that she was once again trapped in the loneliness and unpleasantness of life. The protagonist's long hair rose into the air, while the heroine herself was already falling straight down from the bell tower. Meanwhile, Lucas was walking through the flowering garden and couldn't help but think about the protagonist and her character. He kept looking down because he realized that something is clearly wrong with the Duchess, but he can't figure out what. Remembering the fact that she was lying unconscious in bed, he assumed that it could be the result of her damaged memory. However, remembering meeting her, he couldn't figure out what she was doing in the garden then, or if she was following him. Lucas had even more questions as to why she had so abruptly offered to be his friend back then. He kept walking, thinking about that Selena's character was too complex for him to try and figure anything out about it. Looking at something, he was still surprised that things had worked out this way. It was a real shock to him. For a moment, he even stopped, grabbing his head and not realizing what kind of feeling of uncertainty he had gotten. Then, he looked towards the bell tower and realized that she should be there by now if she had taken that road. Lucas eyed the bell tower suspiciously, as if some uncertain thought was flying around in his head. He decided to stop and think hard about his feelings, because he definitely sensed something amiss. Touching his chin, he assumed that the heroine couldn't be feeling so sad just because of his rejection. But his thoughts were interrupted by the image of the girl, who was clearly lifeless, devastated and sad. And then a horrible thought struck the astonished Lucas like a bolt of lightning, who was able to guess everything. He immediately turned towards the bell tower, about to run towards it with incredible worries for the girl. Lucas tried with all his might to run faster to the building, but at the very top of the bell tower he could no longer see anyone. The warrior was climbing the stairs at the speed of light, trying to save the Duchess or make sure she didn't jump. And as he raced up to the bell, he spotted the dress of the heroine, who herself stood at the very edge of the tall tower. Selena stood mysteriously facing him, already about to take the first step for her quick and painless death. Shocked, Lucas tried to grasp the girl's hand that was falling down, but due to fright and excitement, he was unable to do so. However, showing all his strength, he still managed to grab Selena's forearm firmly, making her stop in an instant. He even pulled the girl closer to him from the edge of the building, while Selena was already preparing to die with her eyes closed. But she opened her eyes wide with surprise when she realized she was in the tight embrace of the one who had saved her from death. She guessed that it was an angry Lucas, because only he could have guessed that she could have done it. When the protagonist realized the whole situation, she only looked at Lucas with lifeless eyes, saying that she was in pain. An already surprised Lucas realized what the lady was telling him. He had pressed her too hard against him. His hand was holding Selena's waist very tightly, not allowing her to even move, and his other palm was firmly clutching the girl's hand, which he had grabbed earlier, thanks to which he had saved her from death. Realizing all this, Lucas did nothing else but completely let go of the heroine from himself, from which she fell to the floor. After that, the girl once again looked at her savior with the same lifeless eyes, as if she had already lost her life. She wanted to say something to him, but because she had forgotten his name again, she couldn't remember what his name was. Then a worried and sweating Lucas told her his name a second time while looking at her with angry eyes. Without taking her eyes off the man, the protagonist first asked him if he had been following her all this time. The couple stood romantically on the topmost floor of the bell tower, about to get to know each other better because of the complicated situation. They both looked as if they had done something wrong, even though they had each done what they had originally wished for. The heroine's question surprised Lucas so much that he just stared at her with his mouth open, not understanding the question. The heroine of the story continued to look at him with downcast eyes, waiting for an answer. To her, it's a simple conversation. But Lucas cast his eyes downward, not understanding why the aristocrat was asking him this very thing, also so indifferently. However, the thought suddenly hit him again that he had just saved her from the death she wanted to do intentionally. So he tried to explain to the heroine that while he was taking a walk, a thought suddenly struck him. The man sat down closer to the girl, asking her if she wanted to die because of his rejection. Selena continued to stare at Lucas as if she had no soul, questioning what he had just said. She remembered her history with the computer game, realized that in this situation, Lucas had destroyed her in one blow. Also suddenly, the heroine thought about the fact that Selena's past love might have been denied by Aiden, that is, the blonde guy who made her like that. And the heroine thought that Lucas's rejection made her finally accept the choice of death. However, the girl continued to look at her agitated interlocutor, not realizing whether he answered her or not. Because of the looks in his direction, she pictured him in nice clothes, realizing that he wasn't a bad guy either. The girl continued to look at Lucas, also realizing that he was a talented, confident man. For a moment, she averted her gaze, thinking that this was the reason why he thought that she only wanted to die because of his rejection. However, showing Lucas her palm, she told him that it wasn't his fault, and she didn't care about the rejection of her friendship. Lucas frowned and leaned closer to Selena, asking her if that was true. The girl confirmed that it was. Looking at the heroine with anger, the man asked Selena why she wanted to jump off the tower then. The main heroine thought about such a question because she will not be able to tell Lucas the whole truth about rebirth. So she continued to stare at him, realizing that he was like a pain in the leg, just as annoying. With her lips ajar, she said that she understood his feelings, but he still had no right to ask her about it. Showing him her index finger, the girl also said that they weren't close enough for her to tell him such a thing. An angry Lucas wanted to tell the heroine that it's not about how close they are, but the heroine interrupted him again. As the sunlight fell on Selena's face, She looked at him and repeated that it wasn't his fault, and he could take it easy. Placing her hands on her lap, the heroine admitted that it was true that she had tried to end her life, but it had only been once. Getting up from the stone floor, the girl told Lucas that he had to leave for that reason. After that, Selena turned back, showing calmness, but she was actually flustered by Lucas's reaction. Looking down, she also realized the fact that her butt was a little sore after falling on the floor. Selena lightly touched her tailbone, through which she realized that she was actually feeling the pain. Lucas continued to stare at the departing girl, wondering if she would jump again if he left. Turning to her companion, the heroine replied that she wouldn't do it a second time because it was too much. As Lucas got to his feet, Selena walked away from him, shivering with anxiety and thinking that you can't do something like that once either. She walked towards the stairs, thinking about the fact that she hesitated a lot even about her death, not knowing what to do. But from the looks of it, the heroine looked normal, which was suspicious to Lucas, who kept his eyes on her. The girl stopped and looked at the stairs, not understanding if her femur was cracked if her ass hurt so much. Because of this, the heroine couldn't understand how she could walk down the stairs if her pelvis hurt so much. Turning slightly back to Lucas, the girl thought it would be really nice if he left right now. The heroine looked at him, sincerely hoping that he wouldn't follow her because it would make her uncomfortable. But Lucasia, who had already guessed everything himself, only sighed before doing something interesting. The first thing he did was step a foot behind the protagonist, causing her to stop. It turns out that Lucas wanted to lift Selena into his arms, which he did, surprising the protagonist. The aristocrat looked at the warrior with a stunned look, asking him if he was going to carry her right out of the tower. Lucas replied with a smile that if he didn't, they would both stay here until the next day. Already down the stairs, Lucas warned the girl, looking her in the eye, not to come up here again. The strong warrior was already carrying her in his arms and trying to carry her down. The heroine admitted that she hadn't originally planned to leave this way. Hearing this, Lucas resented it, sighing at the weight and effort to get the pampered aristocrat down from the bell tower. Realizing what the girl meant by death, Lucas asked the devastated heroine again why this was the case. As he carried her in his arms up the stairs, the heroine thought that if she had taken that particular leap, things would have been easier. The girl could have kept talking to Lucas, alone. Lowering her gaze, she realized that she was falling asleep. She closed her eyes from exhaustion as the knight continued to carry her in his arms from the tower straight into the castle. He watched her face carefully and couldn't understand what she was thinking if she was so mysterious and unpredictable. Sometime later, when it was already dark and the palace was dark, Lucas brought the Duchess home, telling the others about everything. The first to know about the heroine's suicide attempt were her father and brother, who could not even believe that it had happened. While Selena slept on the bed, while her father told Lucas that he did not even think that an ordinary walk would end like this. Even more upsetting to the girl's father was the fact that she deliberately wanted to jump off the tower to end her life. From the extreme stress, the Duke even felt a pain in his heart, after which Aaron tried to calm his father down. Lucas also helped Duke Howitt to his feet, calming him down with words and support. Duke held onto his heart, reassuring everyone that he was fine and didn't need any help. He moved closer to the sleeping protagonist, telling Lucas and his son that he only had one daughter in his life. The heroine's father said her name sadly, looking at her and showing everyone how much he cherishes her and how dear she is to him. Placing his palm on her head, he asked his daughter why she was doing this if she knew that the family would be in a lot of pain later on. But while the Duke, along with his son and Lucas, were talking in the bedroom, there was someone outside the door the entire time who was listening intently to them. That person was a blonde man, the heroine's faithful servant, who was also saddened by the news that Selena wanted to jump from the tower. Thus night fell, and at once 2 moons illuminated everything around them as their light even penetrated the windows. The next day, when the whole family found out that the heroine wanted to die, a thunderstorm came, which only added to the sadness. A heavy downpour poured down on the roof of the Hovite family palace, and none of the windows even had a light on. There was also no light burning in the protagonist's bedroom window, as if the entire house was in mourning because of the girl's terrible attempt to die. In the dim light, as she lay on the bed, a psychologist spoke to her, asking if she was in pain. Looking at the doctor with downcast eyes, the girl calmly replied that only her buttocks hurt. The psychologist continued questioning the heroine about the pain, to which she replied, "She only has pain in her butt, and that's it." Straightforward and boring psychologist decided to tell Selena directly for what reason she then wanted to die. But this only made the heroine even more angry, from which she looked at him with an angry look. Looking away, The Duchess decided to answer calmly, saying that it was all very troublesome for her. After the psycholo finished talking to the heroine, he walked out of the bedroom to the girl's worried family. The heroine's brother, father, rescuer, and mother listened excitedly and attentively to the doctor's words that Selena had no serious injuries. Scratching his nape and lowering his head, the doctor said that there was one but that was very important. The whole family was horrified by what the doctor himself told them. Mole heroine looks overly concerned about something in her life. Gesturing with one hand, the psychologist reassured Selena's parents and brother, telling them that the first thing they need to do is just change their surroundings. At this time, such a heavy and gloomy downpour poured down on the palace until the entire family decided not to talk about Selena in the hallway. After that, everyone decided to sit down in a separate room, after which the family checked with the doctor about what the heroine was so worried about. Looking at everyone, the psychologist first told them about the fact that from the words of Selena, everything is too troublesome for her. The whole family pictured the main character of the story without a heart, listening to the doctor's words that her sadness could be due to trauma or stress. He even described to the family the fact that all these things were accumulating in the girl's heart, making her look devastated. The doctor's words greatly shocked the heroine's mother, which even made tears of grief appear in her eyes. She cannot believe it. Aaron began to comfort his mother with hugs, while the heroine's father asked the psychologist how they should feel about it. The doctor only shook his head and said that there is no effective treatment and he can only observe. The whole family, including Lucas, heard the psychologist's words that trying to cure the heroine would only make things worse. Realizing that now they can only watch Selena around the clock, the father of the family grabbed his head from such sadness. Not knowing what to do, the Duke first turned to Lucas, who was standing nearby, and immediately responded. Looking the brave warrior straight in the eyes, Selena's father asked Lucas to keep an eye on the heroine, because she was very important to him. The Duke's words made Lucas hesitate, not stopping to think angrily about this difficult situation for the whole family. When the Duke left the room with the psychologist and the Duchess, Lucas saw them off with a glance, thinking about the proposal of the head of the family. He noticed that next to him stood the heroine's brother, Aaron, who also felt bad about such terrible news about his sister. By Aaron's emotions, it was clear that he was too much concerned about the state of his sister, who wanted to commit suicide. Lucas understands the heroine's brother's anxiety as he continues to look at him. At first, he just moseyed on, looking at the future heir to the duchy. His violet eyes carefully looked at Aaron, who was already ready to cry because of the protagonist. Holding back his emotions, Aaron sadly turned to Lucas and told him to take care of his sister too. You can tell from his voice that he is greatly disturbed about Selena's health and what she has done. Aaron's mind seemed to be full of anxious thoughts. He looked away, telling the long-haired man that he would really like to help his little sister too, but there were a few things preventing him from doing so. Lucas continued to look at the sad man, who found fault with the problem. Aaron admitted that he thought it was all about him inheriting the duchy, but the tall blonde man wasn't going to be sad. He decided to cheer Aaron up by patting him on the back and asking him not to worry about it. Lucas said he understood his worries well. Suddenly, Lucas remembered that he was the son of a baron, and it was only because of the Duke that he was able to enter the academy he still remembered. He was destined for a bright future from the beginning. Remembering the red roof of the very academy he was studying at, Lucas was pleased that then the Duke, that is, the father of the protagonist, even gave him a separate room in the academy. Lucas remembers that the entire Duke's family treated him as their own son, constantly making him smile, as did Aaron, who attended the same academy and was his friend. Watching the adult Aaron, who was worried about his sister, Lucas realized that he wasn't just a friend to him, but a named brother in the family, so of course he wouldn't be able to refuse to help him. Thinking about Aaron, Lucas also remembered the main character, who usually always goes around angry and disgruntled at everyone. He knows that she most likely hates Aaron, who is actually worried about her. The whole situation with Selena was really boring Lucas. He exhaled as he looked at Aaron and didn't understand why the heroine changed so drastically and even decided to end her life, which thankfully didn't work out. After a while, the protagonist of the story was already constantly visited by someone to make sure that she was recovering. She was often visited by that very faithful blonde man who really pissed off the aristocrat who was lying in bed. She didn't even look in his direction. Frowning, she ordered her subordinate to leave because he annoys her, but he still remained in place. The heroine was starting to get annoyed with all the family's attention towards her. Looking at his mistress with the same saddened and wistful eyes, Bonden said that he just couldn't do it because he was ordered not to leave her under any circumstances. The protagonist looked away while the blonde didn't know what to say out of excitement. Selena realizes that her antics yesterday have caused her even more problems than she had before. Looking away from her blue eyes to the side, the girl sank into her thoughts, guessing that the entire worried family had sent Aiden, the blonde who had been closest to Selena from the beginning, in hopes that she would get better. However, the girl's relaxation ended in a flash when she turned away from Aiden and remembered that he actually hated Selena to death. She had learned about it through the plot of the original novel. The girl even imagined that one day when she is sleeping, Aiden will come to her with a big stone and will want to kill her, which she is very afraid of, as she does not want to die. Realizing all of this, the heroine showed him her hand and lowered her head, and grudgingly asked if he understood what she was asking him to leave or not. Selena still insists on doing what she wants. Looking at the servant, the heroine asked him to at least not stand like a pillar if he wasn't already leaving this place. Aiden didn't understand the heroine's words, causing him to lean towards her, interjecting what she said. Pointing her finger at the annoying Aiden, Selena grudgingly told him several times to finally sit down somewhere, because she assumes that his legs are already swollen from being next to her bed all the time. Aiden reacted rather surprised. It was written all over his face. Plus, he didn't realize if the aristocrat wanted to test him on something or if she was in a bad mood, as she often was. Smiling slightly to show the aristocrat his benevolence, the blonde man told the protagonist not to spoil him like that because he wasn't tired at all. However, in response to this, Selena only clutched the blanket with anger and looked at him and said that she was tired here, and she from the fact that he had been just watching her lying in bed for hours already. The guy seemed to understand why the heroine was so disgruntled. He didn't bother to say anything, but decided to turn away from her and still go to the chair to sit near her. As Aiden walked to the nearest chair, the protagonist looked at him as if she was about to release all her anger on him like steam or fire. She was even sweating with anger and frustration. The girl didn't take her eyes off him. She watched intently as the blonde man quietly and studiously sat down at the chair that was quite close to her and was purposely turned to face Selena. After making sure that the one who was constantly annoying her had moved at least a couple of meters away, Selena fell into bed, exhaling a sigh of relief. She stared at the ceiling, not sure why she was doing all this. But that wasn't the biggest trouble yet. When there was a sepulchral silence, the girl moved her hands, realizing that she was even more bored than she was before, and it was pissing her off. With a great and intense boredom, the girl turned on her side, thinking about the fact that there is absolutely nothing to do in the world she was reborn into. She can't do what she used to do in her previous life. What the girl means is that she can't entertain herself at least with books, which she usually loved a lot in her previous life. She knows that there are no interesting books in this world. She is silent even for the internet or computer, along with other technologies that she last used in the past. All these things have become just a memory to her. Thinking not only about books, internet, or gadgets, the heroine also remembered about music, which can be listened to only if you invite a full orchestra to the bedroom. Sighing from helplessness and boredom, Selena realizes that if she hadn't made that mistake, perhaps everything would be much better than it is now, when she doesn't know what to do to entertain herself, and Aiden is watching her around the clock. Because of her thoughts, the protagonist remembered Lucas, who told absolutely everyone about what happened. Picturing him in her head, the girl realized that she was even a little angry at him. However, she decided not to give in to anger. Continuing to lie on the bed, she tried to calm herself down, thinking now that she would have a million more chances to change things. To calm herself down, she pictured herself happy in a purple dress, thinking about the fact that she would still have time to die while her family was contemplating something of their own. Rolling over onto her back again, the girl realized that in that case she also needed her own plan for dying not in shame, but in some special way that she would enjoy. Clenching one of her palms into a fist, the girl spoke silently to the fictional Selena, asking her if this was what she wanted and how she felt about her plan to solemnly depart from life. Thinking of everything, the heroine told herself that for this reason, she would wait until tomorrow for new opportunities. At this time, there was a heavy downpour outside the window with dark clouds. She told herself that this was the time only for sleeping, so she was about to close her eyes, preparing to sink into the sleep she really needed after a hard and emotional day. After a while, Selena did fall asleep, She quietly snored, while in the room still sat Aiden, who closely monitored the state of the aristocrat. Thanks to this, the girl did not even worry that something would happen to her. However, the strange behavior of the protagonist, coupled with the suicide attempt and suspicious rejection from everyone, made Aiden think about it better and deeper, being wary about something serious. The next day, the downpour was gone, and there were only puddles on the road after the big downpour that reflected the bright light of the sun. In such weather, it was necessary to go for a walk, which was what the characters in the story were up to. But for now, Selena was lying in bed, waking up from her sleep since it was early morning. While raindrops were falling from the leaves, the curtains were already open in her bedroom window, and there seemed to be some noises. It turned out that Selena had been awake a long time ago and was sitting on her bed. She was still in her pajamas, looking at something and thinking about how reality was horrible for her, and she didn't understand why everything was so complicated. These thoughts even made the heroine think. She rested her head on her hand, sighing tiredly and realizing that this day would be the same hassle as yesterday, the day before, and her whole life before rebirth. The girl stood up a little and noticed that Aiden was still sitting where he had sat last night. He looked away while Selena pondered the fact that he was far more loyal than he might seem. But when the girl made the slightest noise, Aiden still redirected his green eyes at her without saying a word for now. Thanks to that, the heroine even felt some peace of mind, realizing that she was being watched. What surprised the girl even more was not that. When she turned her head, she noticed in her bedroom and the main male character in the novel she had been reborn into. Sitting in her bedroom was Lucas, who came to her like this every morning while having tea. Without taking her eyes off the long-haired warrior, the heroine could not understand why he came to her so often, and whether by chance there was a sign hanging on her door that said that if he entered here, he would receive a reward. The protagonist herself preferred to say nothing. She tucked her legs under her to comfortably watch her two guards at once. There was still no soul or passion for life in her eyes. The girl continued to lie in the large and soft bed, while Aiden sat in a chair and Lucas drank tea. Suddenly, Selena looked at Aiden and asked him if he had seen the sign on her bedroom door. At first, he didn't even understand what the aristocrat meant, who always asked him the same obscure questions. Because of that, the blonde was wary, looking at the girl and asking her what she meant, but it quickly came to him. He frowned, going to follow the main character's orders. Standing up from his seat, Aiden looked her in the eyes and told her that he understood what she was trying to tell him. Aiden quickly ran over to the door and then looked out into the hallway, looking at the outside of it. He carefully watched what was on the main character's bedroom door. After he finished observing the object he was interested in, the blonde turned to the protagonist and told her that the maids had cleaned the sign on the door right up to a shine this morning. That didn't seem to be the response the protagonist had expected to hear from Aiden. She looked at him puzzled, as if she hadn't gotten what she wanted, asking him what he'd just told her. Deciding not to get too involved in the conversation, the protagonist decided to get out of bed and tell Lucas and Aiden that she was going out for a walk. The two men immediately told the girl that they would definitely accompany her. After all the heroes got dressed and carefully prepared for the walk, they went out into the garden where the trees were blooming. The flowers on the trees had a magical pink color, which created an atmosphere of romance and fairy tale around. On the one hand, the main character only wanted to walk, so she did not pay attention to everyone, stepping forward and not looking at anyone. And on the other hand, she tried not to notice that Aiden and Lucas were following her, and that made Lucas a little uncomfortable. As the pink petals fell from the blossoming trees around the main character, she thought to herself that it had been 5 days since her failed suicide attempt. She reflected that if she had been quiet, the situation would have improved on its own, but it hadn't. Occasionally, she glanced over at Aiden and Lucas, as they too looked at her with a slight smirk. The heroine was also annoyed that even they hadn't calmed down these days, even though nothing much had happened to her. What pissed the girl off even more was not the guards, who were always by her side, but her own parents. They came to her once every day for 5 days and cried with grief or happiness, which annoyed the girl. The main character liked to lift her head up, looking at the leaves of the trees. She did it the first time too, thinking about what she should do before and how to solve all the problems she had created because of one mistake. She continued pacing around the garden, admiring it and talking in her head to the past Selena. She wondered from her why she was forcing her to lead such a lifestyle when she knew perfectly well that she wanted to die. However, the protagonist's deep thoughts about past Selena were interrupted when she noticed someone ahead of her. She even opened her mouth in surprise, causing Lucas and Aiden to be surprised as well. Right in front of Lucas, Aiden and Selena was looking at an aristocrat in expensive clothes who had his back turned to them. He had short blue hair, which they could immediately tell was Selena's brother Aaron. When he turned around, he obviously didn't expect to see his sister, who had been lying in bed for 5 days and hadn't even gotten up. Because of this, he looked at her in surprise, also saying her name in surprise. However, the protagonist was not so much surprised by her brother's appearance. She does not consider him her own, native person at all, because when she looked at him, she thought that this is the brother of the past Selena, not hers. The girl remembered that this charming guy's name is Aaron Hovite. He is the main claimant for the inheritance. All this the heroine knows only thanks to the fact that several times she read the novel she was reborn into. The brother and sister come closer to each other to talk. Gesturing with his hand, Aaron Howitt first asked the girl how she was feeling and if she had any pain. She replied that she was already fine and nothing like that. The siblings' words seemed to cheer Aaron, who had been worried about her from the beginning. He looked at her, touching his face with his finger from embarrassment and saying that this was great news for the whole family, and him included. This behavior of Selena's own brother surprised the protagonist. Though there was very little emotion on her always dull face due to depression, she was a bit confused by Aaron's behavior and words to her, which was strange for him. Meanwhile, Aaron continued to look at his sister as if in every word he wanted to not offend her or to not piss her off. Then, looking at him, the girl realized that he is probably worried about her, but because of Selena's former character, he does not want to shake up unnecessary things. Because of this, the protagonist also recalled a strange incident that she remembered. She remembers very well the fact that she used to cross paths with Aaron, but he seemed strange, as he was cautious and did not want to disturb her, apparently knowing her character. This only made it even more difficult for the protagonist. She touched her head, realizing that her brother actually wants the best for her when he doesn't disturb her, and smiles at her all the time, even though she's never happy to see him back because of the devastation. Selena realizes that she urgently needs to come up with something and reassure herself, and through this, she makes an interesting decision. Looking at her brother, she suggested that they go for a walk together, which surprised both Lucas and Aiden. Aaron himself was just as much surprised by his sister's sudden suggestion. He stared at her with his mouth open, not realizing if he had heard it or not. The thing was, he didn't expect that his sister, who was angry at everyone, would offer him such a thing. Meanwhile, the protagonist was still waiting for an answer from the future Duke, Aaron. She realizes that he is surprised, but not hearing an answer, she briefly said that if he does not want to, she will not force him. Still shocked by the proposal, Selena's brother answered her that he did not mind at all, and even on the contrary, would be happy to walk with her in the garden. He gestured with his hands, showing that he would not even refuse such an offer. Aaron's mood even lifted when he smilingly told the protagonist that right now he was ready to walk with her to wherever she wanted to go. However, Selena continued to be serious, showing no emotion of joy or anything else. Realizing that her plan was working, she turned to Aiden and Lucas, who were standing behind and silent. She told them that she would also be coming home with only Aaron, so they could both go home as she would only walk with her brother. Aiden and Lucas smiled at Mr. Aaron, while the protagonist looked at them and was clearly waiting for them to leave. The heroine's brother reassured the boys, telling them he could take care of his sister if anything went wrong. Lucas and Aiden had no choice but to obey the aristocrat's orders. They left, allowing the brother and sister to walk alone in the blooming garden as the birds chirped around them, which only added to the picture. At first, the brother and sister walked in silence. They just walked along the path. They seemed to be waiting for the right moment to start talking, or maybe they didn't know how to do it because they were shy. It was obvious from Aaron's face that he was concerned about his sister's condition. He often looked at her with a sad look, not understanding how he could help her. Selena, on the contrary, seemed to feel absolutely nothing. However, the sibling silence came to an abrupt halt when Selena decided to be the first to ask Aaron how he was feeling. This surprised Aaron so much that he looked at his sister in amazement, who was usually not interested in anyone. The couple continued walking down the flowery alley, while the protagonist of the story even asked her brother if he was tired, because in her opinion, he looked very tired and exhausted. Undoubtedly, Aaron was pleased with his sister's attention. A blush even appeared on Aaron's cheeks. He told his sister with a smile that he was fine, although he was still glad that she had asked about his condition. But the protagonist still had no face, as if she was a doll. The brother and sister continued to walk onward and strolled through the garden. The protagonist lowered her gaze, telling her brother that he didn't have to say thank you for that. But Aaron was still pleased, which made him keep his eyes on her. He would have continued walking onward if he hadn't remembered something he wanted to say to his sister. Looking down at the ground, he told Selena that he had something to say to her, and it was important enough to him because it was about a girl. Coughing a bit at the possibly uncomfortable question for Selena, Aaron asked her if her memory had come back, if she was feeling good now and could walk around, talk, remember a lot of things she couldn't before. Sunlight fell romantically on the protagonist as she told her brother that her memory had indeed gotten better and she could remember a lot of things she couldn't do before. The girl kept an indifferent expression on her face. Fixing her long blue hair behind her ear, she even admitted to her brother that she had no problem with these now, so they could all not worry about it. Her sister's words surprised Aaron Howitt more and more. Aaron, following the protagonist everywhere, asked her the logical question, what exactly she remembered that she was so confident about it. Selena replied that she didn't quite understand yet what exactly she managed to recall, but then the girl looked up again enigmatically. She watched the foliage and the way it moved in the breeze. She actually had one thing to tell her brother, which she informed him of. Aaron curiously stood in the middle of the road, looking only at his sister. There was obvious surprise and interest on his face, because his sister's memory was very important to him. But he was even more surprised then when the girl told him that she remembered Moll hated her older brother. Just from that short sentence, Aaron felt as if an electric current had struck him. Goosebumps ran through his body when his sister admitted to him that she remembered perfectly well that she hated him. It made him feel a little uncomfortable. At this time, the heroine was looking at him with empty eyes. She thought that according to her brother, she would hate him again, and although she couldn't say for him exactly, it was somewhat true for her. She continued to look at her brother, who was already imagining that his sister would hate him again. There was no emotion in her eyes, but she thought about the fact that unfortunately she was well aware of victims who don't come back a second time. The girl watched as Aaron gradually seemed to close in on himself, joining his hands and lowering his gaze downward. The protagonist realizes that for Aaron, it's all for love, and for her, she herself doesn't know what. The protagonist's hair was being fanned by a light breeze, and she kept looking at her brother, who was becoming increasingly embarrassed by her sister's frank and direct confession. She realizes that she understands that heartache and emptiness, but Aaron did not yet have the feeling of being abandoned. The girl looks at her saddened brother and sympathizes with him greatly. She realizes that none of this would have happened if it wasn't for the old Selena, but now she is not her, so she will act in her own way. So the girl was no longer going to watch her brother feel shame just because the past Selena hated him. The first thing she did was to look at him decisively, apologizing for the hatred she had felt for him throughout her life. The girl only said this because she knew what she was doing. If past Selena had been around, she would have definitely told her that she understood Aaron's feelings better than she did. So the girl was only telling her brother that she apologized to him for everything. His sister's words surprised Aaron so much that he couldn't utter her name to say anything. There was even a drop of sweat dripping off his face from excitement, for his sister had definitely given him a ride that he would never forget in his life. Aaron looked at his sister so amazed, as if he never even thought of hearing such words from Selena one day, although he did. He asked her in shock as to what she was saying to him now. However, his brother's words didn't even embarrass or stop the heroine. She continued to apologize, even bowing before him and asking that he forgive her for everything bad she had ever done or said towards him. The stunned Aaron could only watch with shock and daze as the one he loved, receiving only anger, hatred, and aggression in return, calmly apologized to him, bowing, showing what she was guilty of in front of him. The shocked heir to the duchy didn't know what to say. He just stood there with his mouth ajar, not understanding why Selena had suddenly decided to change so much that he now didn't even recognize her, his own sister. Selena in turn also remained silent, waiting for her brother's response. She was hesitant to complete her bow as she truly wanted to show that Aaron was dear to her and she was the mean, nasty, and angry sister who never loved anyone in the family. Aaron was so impressed by his sister's actions that he didn't know what to say for a long time. It seems he was even about to have tears when he dared to tell the protagonist that it was very sudden for him. There was actually a lot of things Aaron couldn't understand. If his sister, whom he looks up to, so easily apologizes to him for everything, does that mean that she has truly recovered and won't try to die again? Or does it mean something else entirely? It was as if the protagonist had read his mind. She looked at him with empty eyes, saying that she wasn't joking at all, and apologized to him sincerely, from the bottom of her heart, wanting to ease his suffering. In response to this, Aaron only remained silent. He looked at Selena with the same sad look as if something bad had happened, realizing that it was as if it wasn't the real Selena, and something had clearly happened to her. However, in order not to make his sister worry about the whole situation, Aaron decided to smile, telling her that everything was definitely fine now. But in fact, he still has a lot of doubts related to the main character. After a very difficult conversation, Selena decided to talk about something else. She looked up at the leaves of the trees, which her brother was doing as well, asking him when Lucas and Aiden would stop following her. Touching her chin and continuing down the alley, the protagonist thought about the fact that if Aaron himself told Lucas and Aiden that she was okay, maybe they would get off her back and not follow her around. The girl looked at her brother, hoping that he would agree with her, making her guards not follow her anymore. But a cheerful Aaron only told her that until she fully recovered, he would not let the guards rest. The protagonist didn't bother to argue with him. She only looked at him, realizing then he is not yet confident enough that she is healthy. On the one hand, the girl understands his feelings, but she wants too much to stop being watched. Because of this strange moment, the protagonist feels strange. It's like she's back to being that little girl from her past life, in front of whom her parents stand in front of her and forbid her something she wants badly. The couple continued walking through the garden while Selena looked at her brother and thought about the fact that her brother wants to always be loved and good. That's why he acts like this. However, the protagonist is still haunted by the thought that one day she will be abandoned. The heroine thinks that the problem with Selena's brother is that he never shows anything to people. They may consider him an ordinary and attractive conversationalist, but in fact, he has a lot of feelings and secrets. As if solving some puzzle, the protagonist realized that this is also the brother's priority. He shows his weak side only to those in whom he is confident, and as it turned out, Selena is part of this small number of the chosen ones. The girl even opened her mouth in surprise. It suddenly dawned on her that Aaron is exactly like her in her past life, who has a unique, true essence, and only those who are very close to them know about it. Selena remembered sitting in the hallway due to loneliness and depression. She needed support the most at that time, and remembering it, the heroine had already realized what she would have said to her own face then. She pictured being in a new body, touching the shoulders of her previous self, small and defenseless, telling herself to throw away all expectations because in the end, those who swore her love would ditch her forever. As she continued to think about this, Neroenia imagined for a moment what would have happened if she had said the same thing to her brother. She was already imagining yelling at him, trying to get through to him, but then she asked herself to stop. The reason the girl stopped her thoughts on this was because she remembered Selena's past. She vividly remembered how lonely and sad she had been, realizing that she owed it to Selena's little dream to make sure that there was at least one person by her side. However, she kept her eyes on Aaron, never stopping to think about him. The boy looked at her too. While Selena assumed that the old Selena probably didn't even think about Aaron, she wasn't interested in him. The main character kept thinking about Aaron, his attitude, and how the real Selena and the former her would have acted in her place. And Aaron just smiled at the girl who looked at him with blank eyes. Selena couldn't help but notice the fact that her brother was a little embarrassed when she stared at him intently. He looked down even as the protagonist continued to look at him with a blank face and eyes. However, Selena didn't embarrass him throughout the walk with looks and words. After correcting the earring in her ear and closing her eyes, the protagonist modestly told her brother that she had one conversation to have with him. Turning her head towards her shy brother, Selena confessed to him that she had a request for him. Aaron couldn't ignore it, so he looked at her with great curiosity and interest. Thus, brother and sister continued their walk, talking about a variety of topics until they decided to walk back. After a while, Aiden was already at the palace of the ducal family to tell the family a lot of news. When Aiden Howitt told his parents that the main character had a desire to meet the holy maiden Ariel herself, the Duke and Duchess were shocked and questioned their son if it was really true. Aiden was still cheerful and confident because the good news about his sister made him cheer up. He gestured with his hand with a smile, telling his parents that his sister had personally asked him to meet his girlfriend, Ariel. It turns out that his parents were a bit shocked and wary of such news. The Duchess told her son that she was scared for Ariel because at the last meeting, Selena had done some very scary things to the Holy Maiden. The Duke seconded the Duchess's words. He leaned his head on his hand, telling his son that he still has to consider the fact that Selena has lost her memory, and it is unknown what she really wants to do if she changes like that. The father of the family asked Aiden if it was right that they would still allow her to meet Ariel. He himself, Aiden, stood so enthusiastic that it seemed no one could change his mind anymore. To reassure everyone, he looked at his father and mother with a genuine and kind smile, telling them that everything was going to be okay and much better than they thought. Aiden was even going to tell his parents his point of view. While the Duke and Duchess listened attentively to their son, Aiden himself told them that today his sister had apologized for all the things she had done to him. Besides, according to her, her memory had partially returned to her. Aiden told his parents with a smile that if Selena had asked him to do it, then they should not turn a blind eye to it, but should give the heroine and Ariel a chance to reconcile. In the end, there was nothing left for Aiden's parents but to agree with everything their son wants to do for his sister and loving girlfriend. The Duchess spoke first, informing her son that he should definitely attend their meeting. Aiden agreed to all his parents' demands. He bowed to his mother and told her that he would do as she told him. He is glad that the meeting of his girlfriend and sister will take place precisely on the initiative of Selena herself. After a while, all the heroes of the story found themselves in a beautiful castle with a garden and a red roof, in which the important meeting of the main character with the holy maiden Ariel was to take place. It turns out that absolutely everything was already prepared for this. Ariel, together with Selena, sat in the garden at a small table, on which there were already various delicious things. Also near them sat and Aiden at the request of his parents. The blonde-haired girl has the name of the holy maiden Ariel Frankrit, and she is a saint in the Empire and Aiden's ascendant. This girl told Selena that she had been notified that she wanted to meet with her. Selena herself was also well and festively dressed. She had gemstone earrings and an expensive dress with floral patterns. She looked at the holy maiden Ariel and told her that everything is just as she says it is. In fact, the main character of the story couldn't take her eyes off her brother and Ariel. She looked at their faces, realizing that they even look alike in some ways, and perhaps it is fate if they are such a perfect couple. However, at the same time, the girl couldn't forget the original plot of the novel's story. Sipping tea, she remembers that instead of making her older brother a hero, the author of the novel makes the heroine fall in love with his close friend, that is, Lucas. Selena doesn't understand why this is the way it is. The girl looked at the happy wrath with her favorite girl, realizing that this story is very similar to Hollywood love stories as well. The heroine also realizes the fact that she doesn't really control anything here, unlike the other characters. Selena kept looking at the couple in front of her, realizing that they are very uncomfortable being here, even though they are smiling. Aiden kept looking down, and Ariel couldn't look the heroine in the eyes either. To the protagonist, they were like bunnies who were embarrassed by her presence. She imagined that they also had hair ears, which perfectly complemented their image of a confused but happy couple. It was then that the protagonist realized she was obliged to break the silence. She suddenly stood up from her seat, about to do something. This greatly frightened Ariel, from which she became a little wary, keeping her eyes on her. But what was Ariel's surprise when Selena, as it turned out, did not stand up to do something bad to her, but to bow before her and apologize for all that she had done. Thus, the protagonist lowered her head in front of Ariel, closing her eyes. She understands perfectly well that to apologize, you need to know how to apologize, and it should be done in a special way, in a mature way, which is what she is trying to achieve. A drop of sweat even ran down the face of the holy maiden Ariel from surprise, and when she tried to say something, she stuttered only because of the shock. She didn't think that the one who thought she was her enemy would apologize to her now. The shocked holy maiden shouted to the protagonist and held out her hand, telling her not to do such a thing because it wasn't worth it and she wouldn't be able to get used to it. Aiden was also in severe shock. The amazed blonde-haired girl was literally ordering Selena to lift her head and sit up, waving her arms. She was very worried about her health and condition, because she heard about her trauma that caused her to lose her memory. After the girl was convinced that the holy maiden Ariel had forgiven her for everything, she raised her head, and placing her hand on her chest, she said that she would never do anything like that again. Besides, she has a desire to bless them. To the holy maiden of the empire, and this came as a real shock. She looked at the heroine of the story with such astonishment, which she could not put into words, because it is an honor for her. But Aiden was only glad of this news. Noticing Ariel's astonishment, the protagonist decided to say at once that she meant it, and she realized that no man in the world would believe that she could change from a villain into a kind mistress. Lowering her gaze and putting her hand on her cleavage again, the protagonist went on to say that recently, when she was able to meet death, she realized that she sees humanity and life in a new way. The girl's words surprised Ariel more and more. She looked at her in amazement as she listened to Selena's words that even if she didn't forgive her immediately, she would have no other way, because it was all her fault. At the end of her heartfelt speech, the protagonist said that she only wished them happiness and prosperity because they were a worthy couple. At these words, Aiden took his lover's hand to soothe her heart. Aiden looked at his girlfriend with such kind eyes, thanks to which Ariel could realize the fact that everything was fine. She looked at him too, realizing that she had received a blessing from a previously sworn enemy. The holy maiden Ariel was in no hurry to rejoice or say anything. After looking into Aiden's eyes, she glared at Selena, who was expecting any response, whether it be forgiveness or rejection. Joy quickly swept over the holy maiden, who had actually been dreaming of this since the beginning. She smiled broadly, after which she placed her hands on her chest and thanked Selena for that she had personally blessed them. The happiness, delight, and joy of the holy maiden Ariel was so bright that the protagonist was blinded by her bright emotions. She was even a little embarrassed, realizing that she was able to do what she had been thinking about lately. Thus came the day after the protagonist apologized to Ariel and her brother. One servant in the Hovite family palace opened the curtains, signifying the beginning of the day and another warm, bright morning. It turned out to be the blonde and loyal servant of the protagonist, Aiden, who was looking out the window of his room while getting ready for work at the castle. His room itself was modest, but clean, with no unnecessary furniture. It took him literally a few minutes to get ready for work. He was already in his usual shirt and suit, finishing off his look with a nice burgundy patterned tie. The guy also took care of his manly shoes as well. They glistened in the sun, had a neat, understated look and style, while having the familiar black color everyone was used to. She tied the laces on them, already getting ready to go out. The final touches to Aiden's look were the jacket, which had the same beautiful patterns as his tie, making them complement each other harmoniously. He put it on and adjusted it around his shoulders, remaining silent. The most important but hardly noticeable element in his look was also the white gloves. They were a must for him because he is almost the most important luga in the palace, and that is why they too have a clean, neat look. Thus, Aiden had the image that he was fully prepared to serve the aristocrats, to greet them, or to escort them somewhere. Also on his chest was a red-pink colored gemstone that adorned the whole costume. Meanwhile, in the main hall of the castle, all the servants had already gathered in a row to meet someone. They always gathered together when they were informed that someone from the aristocracy or a family member was about to arrive at the castle. As it turned out, all the palace servants gathered for the head butler with the brooch. They bowed low to him, while their commander encouraged them to work, saying that they should work especially well together today. But suddenly, the butler was distracted by someone he saw not far from him. He turned his head towards the man and recognized him, calling out the guy's name. It turned out to be Aiden, who had responded to the butler's call. The two servants talked together, trying to cheer each other up. The mustachioed butler asked Aiden if he was getting a hard time from his mistress, who was increasingly rejecting him out of spite. Aiden replied that she was, because she had lost her memory and had become a completely different person. The conversation between the two men was overheard by the other servants. The man and woman looked at Aiden, telling him that they were very saddened by this because he used to be the one who protected them from the attacks of the evil Selena. Aiden listened to the words of the rest of the servants, who were truly grateful to him for protecting them from Selena's wrath by constantly taking the hit. They picked up on the fact that he had suffered greatly, for which they were very grateful. Aiden's serious face seemed to show that he wanted to say something to his friends, but couldn't because they kept showering him with compliments. He wanted to say something out of surprise, but he couldn't. So he decided to just tell everyone that he was also very grateful to everyone, while showing his slightly fake smile. It was likely that Aiden was embarrassed by the praise for himself. One maid decided to change the topic of conversation a bit, telling everyone that it was truly amazing to her that Selena had become a completely different person while losing a huge amount of memories. All of this talk seemed to be upsetting Aiden. He listened to all sorts of assumptions from the servants while looking down at the floor. Many thought Selena had a mental disorder, but when someone said that, the butler forbade them from spreading rumors. But Aiden himself couldn't stop thinking about it. It lodged itself heavily in his mind that the main character could seriously have a mental disorder. He looked somewhere without stopping to think about it thoroughly. Eventually, the guy exhaled, not sure where he should look for the truth. He walked down the hallway to the main character's bedroom to check on her once again at the behest of her own parents. When he arrived, he noticed that Selena was still lying on the bed, while wearing a dress that was clearly not meant for that purpose. In conjunction with his thoughts, he could not help but look at the girl, because he was constantly thinking about her. Meanwhile, the protagonist herself was just lying on the bed, not sure what to think about. She was silent, staring at the ceiling with her empty eyes, which made Aiden a little worried about her condition. She soon decided to roll over on her side, as she usually does when she's bored or empty at heart. The main character continued to remain silent, which made it hard for Aiden to understand what she was really thinking. Soon the girl rolled over onto her opposite side. Her eyes were still blank, as if she wasn't thinking about anything at all, though in reality she was probably worrying about something, as she does all the time. Eventually, the protagonist in Selena's body rolled over onto her back, sighing so tiredly and sadly that anyone would have been able to realize the longing and sadness that was on her soul right now. She continued to lie there, not having the energy for anything more. Pushing her hands aside, she couldn't stop thinking about her brother and his girlfriend, whom the former Selena used to hate. She kept thinking about the fact that they would soon have an engagement because she had blessed them. Picturing the happy couple in her head, the girl kept keeping in her mind the fact that in the original novel, the couple immediately broke up as soon as they got married. Selena hoped that at least her apology and blessing would counteract that. The protagonist herself continued to stare at the ceiling. It was as if she was talking to the dewy-eyed Selena, asking her how she felt about the fact that as soon as she apologized to them, they immediately agreed on an engagement day. As the sunlight streamed into the protagonist's bedroom, illuminating her entire room, she realized that it was only because of her brother's engagement, and Ariel had no right to say goodbye to her second, boring life in her opinion right now. Looking at the chandelier, the protagonist of the story reasoned her decision that if she dies before that momentous day for her brother, she will be no different from the real Selena, who died so pathetically. Meanwhile, someone was already rushing into the protagonist's room. While she was thinking about something of her own, Aiden immediately went to the door, but when he heard Lucas standing outside the door, he grimaced. After that, Aiden turned slightly toward Selena, to see if she should let him in or not. Hearing the familiar voice and name, the protagonist raised one hand, shouting for the warrior to enter the bedroom. As soon as the main rider of the duchy entered the girl's bedroom, he immediately started walking towards her in an elevated mood, asking with a smile if she wanted to miss the whole day because of sleeping in bed. The girl continued to be calm, examining her hand. When Lucas came closer to her, she only desolately said that she was safest here, then asked the warrior if that was the case. The protagonist looked at her companion with empty, seemingly lifeless eyes, waiting for him to answer. She thought about the fact that it had been 2 weeks since he had started visiting her bedroom. However, the protagonist did not hear a response from Lucas. He only moved even closer to her, looking at her condition. Because of this, Selena did not understand what he needed from her and what he stuck to her. The girl even stood up to see what Lucas wanted. On the one hand, he just stood there with his hand on her hip, but the protagonist already knows that because of worries he can be picky, and now she has a feeling that he will hit her. Looking at the warrior, who was clearly unhappy about something and wanted to say something to her, Selena decided to briefly say that she would stay here today and not go anywhere. But that answer didn't suit Lucas. He decided to remind her politely, and with a smile, that a sedentary lifestyle was bad for her health, especially when she needed to get better and recover from her memory loss and fall down the stairs. After his words, Lucas glanced at the window, also trying to change the aristocrat's mind that she needed to be out in the sun, not just walking. Selena responded briefly to that as well, telling Lucas that if they opened the curtains, she could sunbathe here as well. Lucas couldn't help but notice the fact that the protagonist was constantly slipping away from the treatment. He gave her a disgruntled look, asking if the reason she closed herself in here was because it was troublesome for her to do anything other than sleep. The protagonist tried to explain to Lucas with a sad voice and devastated eyes that it was troublesome for her to do almost everything, including even living on this earth. But the long-haired warrior quickly interrupted her. Suddenly, Lucas shouted the protagonist's name so forcefully that she couldn't help but be startled. In his shout, Lucas was able to contain all the indignation and anger at the girl that he feels for not wanting to be treated properly. The atmosphere in the room instantly became more wary, which could not help but be felt by Aiden, who stood nearby and also wanted to do something to help the protagonist. He kept silent because he had no right to interrupt the aristocrat's conversation. Selena herself could tell that he was also shocked by Lucas's behavior, not thinking what had come over him. It was written all over her face as she looked at him and tried to understand something. Upon doing so, an angry Lucas immediately realized his mistake, so he tried to correct it. He put his hand on his chest, and after coughing a little from embarrassment, he told the main character to forgive him for being so rude. Sincerely looking at the girl, as if all this had not happened, Lucas also asked her to accept his feelings as well, since from his words he is truly worried about her health and condition, especially mental. However, this behavior of Lucas only shocked both the protagonist and Aiden, who had been listening to him attentively all this time. Selena continued to stare at him in surprise, and Aiden was angry at his colleague. The girl could only stare at the one who was now taking out his anger and discontent on her, and then pretending that nothing had happened, and he was a loyal servant like everyone else. Selena even thought that he deserved some kind of award for his acting skills. It was only because of this occasion that the protagonist was able to remember something important about him that she had learned from the novel. In fact, no matter how nice Lucas may be on the surface, in reality he is an experienced deceiver and actor. But at the same time, when the protagonist of the story looked at him with surprise, she could not deny the fact that he is calculating in his actions, thanks to probably what made him reach such heights in his career. Looking at Lucas, Selena also quickly remembered that she, as well as the House of Duke's protagonist in the novel, were not part of that rule, so he would not cheat them for any reason. Looking disdainfully at Lucas, the girl realizes that if she doesn't get up now, this play won't even end. However, Selena has already seen enough of it, so she's not going to put up with it any longer. She watched Lucas still standing in front of her and waiting for her to get out of bed. At this point, the protagonist realized that she had lost, and she still had to go outside for a walk at least once. In the end, the girl got out of bed, but she did it with such helplessness, reluctance, and boredom that Lucas and Aiden didn't even have to guess that she still wanted to just stay in her room and do nothing for days. But that wasn't all. The very first thing Aiden noticed out of everyone was that the main character couldn't get out of bed. He looked at her with a look of shock and numbness that he had never had before. Then he found the answers to all his questions. Meanwhile, Lucas continued to watch as Selena couldn't get up. She sat on the bed, trying to pull herself together and thinking about the fact that besides going to the restroom, she was constantly spending time in bed, which was where she got this tiredness and powerlessness from. The girl looked at her legs, which from the looks of it looked completely normal. But because she moved them very little, she could no longer feel them at all, which made her unable to stand up. Realizing that she couldn't do it on her own, Selena looked at Lucas, who was smiling at her, and quietly asked him to help. Lucas immediately agreed, stepping closer to the girl, but Selena still wasn't sure about something. While Lucas looked at her kindly, about to pick her up in his arms, Selena herself thought about the fact that if they both went for a walk now, she would hear even more reproaches from him than she had now. The girl's anxiety is noticed by Aiden. Therefore, the protagonist makes a different decision. When Lucas wouldn't do something, she pointed a finger at Aiden, telling him to come over and calling him a short name. Aiden was surprised by this, already running up to the aristocrat. When a determined Aiden was already approaching the main character, showing Lucas all his strength and work, Selena said that he just needed to pick her up, or else help her up. The girl couldn't even sit up clearly on the bed. Because of her poor coordination and weak legs, she almost fell on the bed, but she leaned on her arms in time. This made Aiden even more worried about the girl. It didn't take a second before Aiden immediately started to fulfill the girl's request, throwing her arm around his shoulders and helping her out of bed. The guy also asked Selena if she was okay. However, there was still no face on the main character. While Aiden was worried about her, inquiring about her health, she wondered if Aiden was an actor like Lucas, and if he was genuinely worried about her. The main character's strange behavior surprised and made Lucas a little angry. He stared intently at the couple, not understanding why she suddenly chose Aiden over him and whether she really trusted him. Meanwhile, Aiden and Selena were already out of the bedroom. The guy was helping the main character not to fall down while she was thinking that she had made the right choice, because he had a conscience, and Aiden was nice to her. Sometimes the girl looked at Lucas, who was walking behind them, and realized that compared to Aiden, he was a scoundrel. While Lucas didn't understand why the protagonist was casting such suspicious glances at him, Selena asked the past villain why she let herself fall in love with such a type. The girl ended up walking down the hallway accompanied by Aiden, who held her hand and made sure she didn't fall. And Lucas stayed behind them, not knowing why the heroine was rejecting him so much. The protagonist herself has realized that she completely misunderstands the former Selena's relationship between these men. She wondered why she loved Lucas instead of Aiden as she continued to walk down the hallway. Aiden, for his part, continued with his duties. Sometimes he would notice that the protagonist was somehow thinking hard about something, so he would ask her what was wrong while the girl herself pondered the fact that understanding is part of being human. The protagonist watched carefully the face of the one who helped her in such a simple matter as walking. She accepts that she wants to die soon and leave that life where she has everything. The protagonist looked at Aiden's face, realizing that she wants to live longer in this body for the sake of it, even if she will be treated like a servant or slave. Suddenly, the girl called Aiden's name as if she didn't know his name. Aiden himself did not expect what the lady said to him. Out of the blue, she asked him what his name was, which stunned Aiden, for he thought she knew him because they had been especially close lately. When the boy continued to stare at the girl in surprise, she repeated herself, saying she wanted to hear his name because she didn't know it. Aiden continued to look at the heroine with intense surprise. Surprised, Aiden told the girl his name, still not realizing the whole situation. He had believed until this moment that Selena remembered him, but it turns out she doesn't even remember his name, which upsets him. The protagonist of the story herself felt a kind of relief at this point. She imagined herself holding on to her cleavage and getting a relief that she had never dreamed of. Continuing down the hallway, the girl was about to say something to an already surprised Aiden. He listened intently as Selena told him that someone like him was clearly not an ordinary person. Aiden heard the main character's words perfectly well, but he didn't understand anything from them. He questioned the girl about what she said, preparing to hear something even more shocking to him. However, the protagonist didn't bother to say anything. As Aiden walked and looked at the girl, trying to hear her answer, she only got embarrassed because she started to speak her thoughts out loud. It made her feel uncomfortable. After the couple walked through the corridors, with Aiden holding the aristocrat so she wouldn't fall, they went outside the family palace for the protagonist to enjoy the fresh air and the beauty of nature. The girl walked down the stone road at a rather fast pace, constantly thinking about Aiden and Lucas. She was amused by the fact that they were drastically different, and that was what gave her all new portions of thoughts. The main character was telling herself to take a look at them, or rather she wasn't saying it to herself, but to the past Selena who was originally drawn to Lucas and Aiden, not knowing that he was a liar and rejecting Aiden who seemed to be loyal to her. Right now, Selena's hand is being held by someone who betrayed the past Selena, but who she trusted from the beginning. The heroine doesn't understand how her friend could not see this while being a skilled villain, but also the girl was held by the hand of the one who deliberately imprisoned the former Selena, making her suffer as if the girl had already gone to hell without the possibility of survival and escape. However, now the protagonist who had been reborn into Selena's body was calmly walking around with both of them holding her hand, showing the fact that they were worried about her condition. Selena would have continued to walk onward in sepulchral silence, and accompanied by the two men if she hadn't heard something. She was surprised to catch with her hearing the gossip that was being spread by the servants in the garden. These servants turned out to be maids who were usually responsible for washing the clothes of the aristocrats. They squinted at the protagonist and her servants, whispering to each other that they were a real couple and they were Selena's boyfriends. Thanks only to these rumors, the protagonist remembered something important. Selena decided to recall Aiden's appearance and realized that next to him is not just a maid, but a handsome man with incredible looks. The same she can say about Lucas, who has even more unusual and beautiful appearance due to long white hair, light masculine face, and violet eyes, which are very rare. The protagonist is seriously considering Lucas. She realized that literally everyone would be able to consider him an Apollo because he has silver hair and rare, beautiful facial features that few people have. Because of this, the girl herself couldn't take her eyes off Lucas. She realizes that everyone thinks he's beautiful, even if they look at him for the first time, because Lucas is unique by nature. Lucas was definitely looking at Selena the same way. He had no idea that at that moment the blue-haired girl was thinking that they were all as beautiful as they were described in the book. She assumes Lucas uses his pretty face a lot, but Lucas couldn't help but notice that the aristocrat was constantly looking at him as if she wanted to tell him something, or constantly thinking about him. He did not understand the girl's behavior a little, so he asked what was the matter. Selena, in turn, continued to look at Lucas with a kind of disdain, telling him that she did not want anything like that from him. But from the aristocrat's face, the ducal rider could easily tell that she was holding something back. When Selena was done thinking about Lucas, she decided to turn her attention to the handsome Aiden. She set her eyes on him to begin evaluating not only his looks, but his character with honor. Picturing his eye-catching appearance that was adorned with blonde hair with green eyes, the girl thought about the fact that this green-eyed blonde had such pure green eyes that it was even annoying. She even thought about how Aiden and the Aiden she learned about in the book were very different. However, no matter how handsome and mesmerizing he was, Selena couldn't understand why he had become so moody lately. Even she had noticed it the other day. But the reason Aiden was actually glum was because he couldn't forget the way the main character, who had known him since he was a child, had asked him his name. He was so shocked that he couldn't seem to ever forget it again. For this reason, a saddened Aiden walked along with Selena and Lucas with his head down, unable to believe that she couldn't even remember his name. This greatly upset the faithful servant, for whom the heroine is an important person. In addition, the loyal servant of the protagonist was surprised at how evasive the aristocrat could be in her answers. It even irritates him a little, but in truth, he would like to know the true reasons for the heroine's behavior. Selena couldn't help but notice the strange behavior of her servant, who was constantly worrying, thinking about something with a face like something was bothering him. She looked at him and wondered if he accidentally wanted a sweet if he was so worried. The trio walked a little closer to the castle as they continued their walk. By this time, sunset was already starting to set, which only adorned the blooming rose garden. The heroine got a little bored, because the whole walk she didn't say anything, and her companions were also silent. The girl walked along the path, leaning on both Aiden and Lucas's hands. Unlike Aiden, Lucas was always smiling, as if he was hiding something, or showing his confidence to everyone. Aiden, on the other hand, was calm, wanting to cheer up the girl, who was clearly in need of treatment, telling her to get more physical activity for her health. A slightly perturbed heroine asked Lucas why he was suddenly saying that. Lucas explained his words by saying that the engagement of her brother and the holy maiden Ariel was coming up the other day, and if she didn't want to appear pale and weak at this celebration, she should move well. The protagonist wished for only one thing, for Lucas to get behind her as soon as possible. She continued to stare ahead with her empty eyes, saying that she understood him and would therefore take more frequent walks in the air. However, as it turned out, Lucas continued to be disgruntled. He told Selena that it wasn't enough for her because she still needed to eat right. The girl asked Lucas what he was talking about, and he explained that she should keep her posture when she eats, plus it should be done at a table and not in bed. Selena was very uncomfortable with Lucas, who was always bugging her. She made a disgruntled face, telling him that she understood, doing so only for the warrior to finally get off her back. However, the protagonist was too much pissed at him to continue talking to him. She abruptly took her hand away from Lucas's palm, grudgingly telling him to give those same words to the married couple Aaron and Ariel. Lucas answered nothing to the heroine, though his face showed emotions of quiet indignation and incomprehension. He didn't understand why the girl was acting so angry and disgruntled, but he couldn't say something back to her because of Selena's politeness and status. When Lucas was behind the protagonist, the girl looked at him with an indifferent look, saying that this was the end of his work and he could safely return to the palace to his duties. But it turns out that was not all. The girl turned to Lucas 180 degrees to tell him something else important, something that concerns personally the best writer of the duchy. The girl turned to Lucas and told him to immediately finish his act that he has been playing out for a long time. Selena even asked him if the warrior thought that she didn't notice, because she was actually very uncomfortable about it. The protagonist did not wait for her servant's response or indignation, but only turned back, showing Lucas that she had said everything she really thought about him. After that, Selena, along with Aiden, walked further down the path while Lucas watched them. The girl ordered her faithful servant to return to the palace, which the servant began to do. However, Lucas himself did not remain silent to the girl who was so openly telling him her opinion of him. He, as if without a soul, telling the girl that having lost her memory, she had changed so much that she stopped showing her emotions. The man, touching his hand to his chin, also said that this was the only reason for her shrewd, angry look, as if it had become even sharper than before. Lucas only had to stand and see off the aristocrat, who was already walking with Aiden by the hand as if nothing had happened. He pointed that he was so curious now that he would have followed her anyway. Smiling, Lucas looked at Selena and thought about how even the Dukes of Duchess couldn't stop him from following the main character and trying to figure out what had gotten into her lately. Slowly, the day was getting closer to dusk. Melina and Aiden were able to enjoy a walk and then went to the castle. The fleeting clatter of plates and cooking utensils could already be heard from one window of the castle. In the luxurious garden, the protagonist was sampling various desserts with Aiden while sitting at a small table. The servants brought her a variety of cakes, tartlets, cakes, and biscuits to satisfy the aristocrat's preferences. Selena also drank tea, washing down her dessert with a hot drink. In fact, she wanted to have a picnic in the garden from the beginning, because she noticed in time that Aiden was behaving strangely and anxiously, which alerted her. The heroine knows that he likes desserts. But unlike Selena, who was sitting across from him enjoying her desserts, Aiden didn't look happy or elated. He was looking at her with a kind of sadness written all over his face. This the protagonist couldn't help but notice. When she observed him for a while and found out that he was too sad, she called out his name. The guy instantly responded by asking the mistress what was wrong. Looking at her interlocutor, the girl decided to ask him the question directly. Presenting a beautiful cup to his face, she asked him why he wasn't eating desserts and if he was nervous by any chance. It was obvious by Aiden that he was overly worried about something he didn't want to tell her. He began to spread his arms anxiously, telling the protagonist that things were not what she thought they were. There was even a drop of sweat running down his cheek. But it was only through the gaze of the protagonist that Aiden realized he couldn't get away with it that easily. He lowered his eyes down, stopping himself from telling Selena any excuses. The guy didn't want to upset the girl. Unlike Aiden, Selena continued to drink her tea quietly. She thought about the fact that he was really nervous, as she had assumed. At this point, the heroine's faithful servant was telling himself that his anxiety was at an all-time high. But as it turned out, that wasn't all. Looking at the various desserts and sandwiches that adorned their table, the girl decided to confess to Aiden that she had decided to go out and eat only with him from now on. The words of the heroine surprised the servant. The girl explained her decision as calmly and briefly as possible. She looked at her interlocutor and told him that she had decided to do it only because she was disgusted by everyone, but not by him. Aiden really resented this turn of events. He didn't stop fidgeting, but on the contrary, he did it even more, spreading his hands and telling Selena that it was wrong, because in case of anything, he wouldn't have the strength to protect her, unlike Lucas. To this, Selena was already preparing her argument. She was calm and confident in her words, continuing to drink her tea like a queen, telling Aiden that unlike Lucas, he could use magic. The girl had just blabbed the most secret of secrets. Aiden was so surprised by the main character's words that his eyelids flickered upward. It was like goosebumps ran through his body when he heard such a thing from Selena. What is even more of a mystery to him is how she knows this. At that moment, watching the reaction of the servant, the protagonist realized that she had said too much. She told the guy so, while excitement grew in her heart for fear of how Aiden would react to it. What made the protagonist even more uncomfortable was that Aiden is exactly the kind of person who openly shows his true emotions. Because of this, Selena had to watch the guy almost turn blue with fear. However, at the same moment, he apparently decided that he was going to turn on his acting. He coughed a little and asked the girl what she was telling him. Selena was surprised by this, because he could have already revealed himself, but still prefers to hide it. The protagonist also decided to broach the subject and talk about whatever she felt like talking about. She handed the guy a saucer of strawberry dessert and told Aiden to eat it, because he really likes that kind of candy. Aiden looked at the strawberry cake, which only looked like an appetizer. It was decorated with ripe, huge strawberries and had freshly cut sweet strawberries between its layers. Aiden looked at the dessert, rather puzzled. He decided never to touch the dessert that he actually liked more than any food in the world. Instead, he looked at the mistress and asked her if he could ask her one question. It came to Selena's attention that most likely this guy would probably want to ask her about how she knew about his magic and why she even thought that. However, kept her composure as she asked Aiden what he specifically wanted. The guy then touched his hand to his chest and looked at his mistress and first told her that she didn't even remember his name, despite the fact that they used to be close. Aiden said he wondered what made her think he liked those brownies. The main character didn't even know how to answer that question. She certainly wouldn't tell him the truth about actually being reborn in Selena's body and learning the whole story thanks to the novel, so she kept quiet. Instead, the protagonist, taking the cup with which she was drinking tea, told Aiden that the butler, the cook, and the maid, whom the kind and diligent Aiden cared so much about, brought him cakes every time something happened. The aristocrat's words so surprised Aiden that it took away his power of speech. He looked at Selena and couldn't believe that she was second-guessing herself, realizing that for some reason he had grown to love desserts. But really, the protagonist only knew this because she had reread the novel she had been reborn into several times in her first life. She still remembered the red cover of the book and some of the illustrations from it. It was only because of the story that the girl was able to remember and imagine the chronology of events in the original. She ponmanced that the novel told how the unhappy servant was afraid that he would be thrown out on the doorstep again, so he clung to the Duke's house with all his might. However, he constantly felt pressured because of Selena's past, who beat him, used bad words, taking advantage of his status. It was only because of the fear of being on the streets that Aiden had to endure it all, and for that reason alone, all the servants in the Duke's house, who were greatly afraid of Selena herself as well, were constantly supporting Aiden by giving him strawberry dessert. The servants were specially sharing the high-class treat from the aristocrats' tables with him. Now for Aiden, strawberry dessert is not just a food. Remembering it, the girl realizes that for this guy, it could be a whole symbol of his determination, resilience, and desire to live the good life. Selena thought about all of this as she continued to look at what was on the table. She was holding a fork while directing her soulless eyes somewhere downward, which spoke of her deep thoughts. It appeared that the protagonist wished to taste a chocolate piece of cake, from which she was already breaking off a smaller piece with her fork. The chocolate cake glistened in the sun with a brown color, which said that it was not only good to look at, but also very tasty. Breaking off one small piece of cake, the protagonist decided to try it at once, closing her eyes to get a better taste of this aristocratic dessert in her mouth. However, something made Selena wary. She looked at the chocolate dessert as if there was something wrong with it. The girl continued to stare at it with a slight confusion and incomprehension that even Aiden had little understanding of. Aiden himself couldn't help but notice that the main character's mood had changed drastically when she tasted the chocolate cake. He looked at her warily, asking what was wrong. In fact, Aiden had no idea that it was all about Selena's memories. It was about that in her past life, she only knew one flavor of cake, and it was chocolate flavor. When she went to the hospital and visited her sick sister with a chocolate cake, she gave her a piece to try. While the heroine's parents only paid attention to her sister, she held the cake in her hand without even thinking that it was delicious. She only took it because it was her sick sister who gave it to her. Looking at the cake she now sees in front of her, the protagonist remembered that she didn't eat it then because she thought it was delicious. She swallowed it for the reason that she had to, because she could taste its sweet flavor. The main character closed her eyes and tilted her head back, recalling more and more memories just because of that cake. She knows that she still can't figure out if it tasted good to her or not. Mrs. Selena remembers that the moment she held the chocolate cake in her hands for the first time, all she could think of was that she absolutely had to eat it because she had no choice of her own. In fact, Selena must have strongly wished that this chocolate cake was a symbol of their family happiness and togetherness, but in reality, she was just eating the cake and watching her parents play with her sister. Lifting her head up, the protagonist couldn't stop thinking about it. The girl was asking herself why she didn't realize it back when she first showed up here. She thinks she's a real fool. After the deepest thoughts about her real family and her first life, the protagonist did open her blue eyes, realizing that she didn't know anything about her former self until she was reborn and looked at herself from the outside. With a silent expression on her face, the girl continued to remain silent, not even noticing that she was already being actively called out by Aiden, who didn't understand what was wrong. He only watched as, after one piece of chocolate cake, the girl thought so deeply that she stopped hearing him. What was clear to Aiden was that he was greatly concerned for his mistress. Worry was painted on his face as he asked the protagonist if she was all right, for she suddenly turned pale. But Selena didn't bother to explain to a worried Aiden literally everything she was thinking. She kept it a secret, addressing the servant by name. The boy responded immediately, going to fulfill any request the noblewoman might have. However, Selena had no intention of asking him for anything. Her sad eyes looked at the floor, and from the expression on her face, one could easily tell that she was sad. The girl told Aiden that she hated chocolate cakes. Aiden again didn't know what to say specifically to the girl who sadly confessed this to him. He stared at her in surprise and wariness, not realizing what the best thing to do in such a situation was. Wanting to cheer up the protagonist and do his best to keep her from being sad, Aiden jumped up from his seat, leaning over the desserts. He said that in that case, he would get himself this chocolate cake. Standing up from his seat, Aiden decided to replace the chocolate cake, which the heroine clearly didn't like, with strawberry cake, which he usually liked very much. At this time, Selena preferred to remain silent and watch the servant's actions. She had nothing to say even when she was looking at the strawberry cake that Aiden had chosen for himself. But now, he didn't mind swapping pieces of cake with the protagonist. The strawberry dessert was also incredibly beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, just like its chocolate version, which the girl didn't like. She immediately decided to pierce it with a fork to taste it, breaking off a small piece from the strawberry cake, as if it was for a little bunny or an inch girl. She presented it to her lips, so that this time she wouldn't be disappointed in the taste of the sweetness. At this time, Aiden himself was watching the protagonist gobble up another cake, but her face no longer had the emotions he was used to, which had given way to sadness and desolation. All of this was only visible on the girl's face. After a few seconds, the guy decided to turn away from the girl so as not to embarrass her by looking at her. He walked towards his seat, to continue sitting, but he still had no way of realizing one thing. Aiden seriously wondered for what reasons the mood of an ordinary and disgruntled aristocrat could so abruptly become literally nothing. No matter what he said or did, Selena always responded with a kind of coldness, while showing no emotion on her face. But that wasn't what was most important to the guy. It bothered him a lot that sometimes Selena looks at him with a kind of sad look on her face after she woke up from her coma. Aiden even thinks that it's like she's left this world. Because of the scary thoughts, Aiden even pictured Selena in the saddest possible way, sitting as if she had lost even her meaning of life. Aiden began to guess that the heroine was acting like this, as if she had already left this world. Thanks to all these thoughts, Aiden sat across from the girl and didn't understand how to cheer her up. Because of that, he was also sitting in a depressed mood, as if half the world had collapsed before his eyes. He might even want the aristocrat to shout and scold him as before, but just not be sad. The girl ate only a couple slices of strawberry cake, placing her fork next to it on her plate. Turns out that was enough for the girl to taste the sweetness, to recognize the taste. She no longer wished to eat it. All the time looking at the floor, the protagonist sadly told her interlocutor that it turned out to be really delicious. Moreover, from her words, it has such a flavor that she is unable to describe in words. This made Aiden very happy. He even smiled because of the joy, asking the protagonist if she was joking, if she had tasted this strawberry cake many times in her life. The guy felt that it became calmer on his heart. The girl replied that his words were certainly true, but that the strawberry cake she tasted now was definitely the most delicious cake she had tasted in her life. However, the protagonist didn't look only at herself. She glanced at Aiden, who at this time continued to just sit there, talking to her about cakes. The heroine asked him if everything was okay now. The guy realized that the girl was referring to the fact that he still hadn't touched the cake he had placed on his desk. Aiden stared at the chocolate cake, about to taste it. Soon the boy decided to try the chocolate dessert. He broke off one piece with his fork and put it in his mouth, expecting to taste a different, more interesting flavor than the strawberry cake. Aiden didn't say anything, but it was obvious from the look on his face that the chocolate cake was causing him to have very mixed thoughts about its flavor. He continued to remain silent, as if tasting it for the first time. After Aiden put down his fork, he rather told the protagonist that this cake also had the most excellent flavor of all. But he couldn't finish because Selena interrupted him mid-sentence. The girl looked at Aiden with a puzzled look and asked him if that strawberry cake was the most delicious, as he had said earlier, while stating it confidently, as if he would never change his mind. Aiden decided not to recant. He told his mistress that that strawberry cake is not just delicious, but delicious. With those words, the guy lowered his eyes while smiling contentedly. Even the protagonist herself smiled a little when she saw her companion with a warm smile. The guy's words that he thought the flavor of the cake was delicious also stuck in her mind, also saying that the chocolate one was pretty good too. The couple continued to sit in the garden as the sunset rays began to filter through the windows. Aiden was telling the aristocrat, "Mole now if she gets any cakes she doesn't want to eat, then have her call him." The boy said he would gladly accept them, as long as the heroine didn't make such a sad face. The next morning came, the rays of which fell evenly on the roof of the palace in which the protagonist lived. She wished to sleep peacefully, but she had no idea that the servants would not allow him to do so. One short-haired servant girl abruptly opened the thick curtains in the protagonist's bedroom, causing her to wake up. She also turned to her and told her to wake up immediately, apparently because today was an unusual day. However, the mistress was in no hurry to get out of bed. She asked the maid what time it was, and after the girl replied that it was 6 in the morning, the protagonist didn't understand at all why she was being woken up so early. The maid informed Selena that today was the ceremony of engagement of Mr. Aaron with the holy maiden Ariel. Because of these words, the heroine immediately introduced her dressed-up brother. The protagonist decided to get out of bed, thinking that it wouldn't take long to prepare for the ceremony itself. She was so sleepy that she didn't open her eyes. She needed time to finally wake up. The first thing they decided to do for Selena was to arrange for a bath. The maids had already prepared the bathroom for this, so they only needed to take the heroine to the room, which was already filled with hot steam. One girl was pouring hot water into Selena's bathroom from under a beautiful white pitcher, constantly asking her if it was too hot. There was steam coming out of this water too, indicating that the maids had tried to make the water quite hot for Selena. The protagonist was already enjoying her bathing experience. All she had to do was to lie in a hot bath full of roses while one of the maids washed her hair, preparing her for the big event in her brother's life. After the bath treatments were over, the protagonist put on a white robe and sat on some chair. The maids continued to groom her, brushing her wet, clean hair. The maids constantly asked the mistress for permission for this or that action, and the heroine had to answer that she always did not mind. In this way, the maids gradually prepared Selena for the holiday, while usually she could not even be forced to go for a walk. The girl carefully and gently brushed her hair so as not to damage it or hurt it. The maids didn't only revolve around the mistress's hair. For example, when one of them was working on Selena's hair, another might tend to her nails, making them shiny and neat with soft, absorbent cotton. Similarly, the girls also took care of the main character's nails. One girl held her heel and carefully wiped her toenails so that her image at the party would be perfect in every sense. Meanwhile, the protagonist herself didn't even seem to be paying attention to what the maids were doing to her. She tilted her head back a little due to drowsiness, preferring to doze off at least for a while longer. However, Selena felt as if she had been electrocuted when she realized that her hopes that all the preparations for her brother's engagement would be short and simple had been shattered. This was only the beginning of her agony. These thoughts made the girl wake up. She noticed that it was only because of the engagement that all the maids were running around her more than usual. Each of them was minding their own business while shouting out to the others for someone to bring, for example, hair balm or lotion. While Selena sat on the chair, a large number of maids were almost flying around the room, trying to find something suitable for the aristocrat. At the same time, the girls who were constantly grooming her were also next to Selena. Selena only had to look at all the things that were happening around her. She realizes that no one has any free time right now. The maids continued to comb her hair, also adding different balms and masks. The protagonist decided to remember the palace, or rather the place where the ceremony is planned to be held. The gesture is that instead of holding the wedding in the imperial palace, they decided to hold the wedding ceremony in the halls of the Herzen estate, and it is not surprising that everyone is so busy. Suddenly, into the room where the protagonist was, surrounded by excited maids, Aiden decided to enter. He held a dark blue box in his hands, and with a smile told the heroine that the jewelry he ordered had arrived. However, when Selena, beautiful in every way, appeared before him, the guy didn't care about the jewelry. He looked at the marvelous girl in a robe and with beautiful hair, who was also quietly looking at him. Because of the girl's superb image, Aiden even got a blush on his cheeks. He was so surprised to see Selena just like that he couldn't utter a word, continuing to stare at her as if she were a deity. Soon the boy had to tear his eyes away from his mistress, because otherwise he would have looked very suspicious. He decided not to embarrass Selena with his gaze, turning his head away from her and covering his blush on his face with his hand. Immediately after, a red-haired maid ran up to the embarrassed Aiden, who was very excited about the jewelry. She walked over to the boy to take the box in her hands, telling Aiden that the jewelry had arrived just in time. The maid looked admiringly at the large box of jewelry, occasionally glancing at Aiden, who was standing nearby as well. She thanked him for taking it upon himself to buy such an important piece in her mistress's look. But when the girl turned to look at Aiden, she noticed that he was no longer in the spot where he had been standing just a second ago. This surprised the girl, causing her to wonder where he had already disappeared to, so without a trace. It turned out that Aiden was in a hurry to get as far away from Selena's room as possible, because he felt ashamed to see her like that. He was in such a hurry that his stride could be compared to running. He walked down the corridor as if in a hurry to get somewhere, thinking about the fact that being a servant of the mistress, it was the first time he had seen her change her clothes, although he had visited her in her bedroom before. The thoughts didn't make the boy's cheek blush. At the same time, Aiden couldn't understand one thing. Why in that awkward moment Selena had looked at him as if there was no shame in it. There was still that indifference in her eyes that was always there, even when she looked at Aiden. But what surprised him even more was that the protagonist didn't care about him so much that she yawned in his presence, as if it were just an ordinary, unremarkable appearance of a servant. Aiden remembers that moment vividly. The memory made Aiden feel even more embarrassed. On the one hand, the girl did not do anything special, but her unique image for a long time remembered Aiden, who considers her incredibly beautiful. When the protagonist continued to be prepared for the ceremony by the huge number of maids she saw in front of her, she realized how carefree her days used to be. As she lay on her bed, the heroine even thought about the fact that the maids looked at her as if they were predators who wanted to eat her. But when it came time to choose the most important thing, the dress, the heroine realized that she was very tired. The maids showed her a variety of dresses, saying that they were the best ones left after 72 days of careful selection. However, Selena tiredly answered them that she would wear the leftmost dress. The maids couldn't even get Selena to look at what had been prepared for her in advance. She wouldn't even look at the shoes that were also specially prepared for her, saying that she would wear the leftmost of them. Even as for the gloves, the mistress said that she would wear the leftmost ones, that is, the first ones she could find. Although the maids presented her with a large selection of white and red gloves with different patterns and decorations. As for the fan, the situation was the same. The maids constantly wanted to offer the mistress this or that fan, but heard from Selena only that she would take with her the leftmost fan of all there was, that is, any fan. After the image was ready, the maid suggested that the protagonist at least look at herself in the mirror. But Selena thought only about the fact that she was very tired of gathering for the ceremony, and before she did not even think that she would choose dresses and shoes. But it was only worth it for the protagonist to look at herself in the mirror, as she immediately realized that her image was not as left field as she thought from the beginning. She looked at herself and was surprised, from which she raised her eyelids. In the mirror, the heroine of the story saw herself, who was wearing the most gorgeous, darkest dress she could think of. She could not take her eyes off herself, marveling at her beauty and realizing that the maids had done their best. The girl couldn't stop looking at her own face. With her lips ajar, she thought about how she would never get used to this alien face. But at the same time, she didn't realize what the face of the real her was like. Selena gazed even more into her face after these thoughts. She realized that she couldn't even remember her past self, but she couldn't accept the real one because she realized that she was only reborn. Looking in the mirror, the only thing the girl could remember was that she had brown hair. She told herself not to even try to remember her former face because it was finally out of her memory. Besides, it was customary to forget the faces of the dead. With this ambiguous thought, the girl got up from her seat and turned around, going somewhere else, just not to look at the mirror that had awakened so many memories in her. But then she stopped, thinking carefully about the face of the real Selena, when she had not yet been reborn into her body. The heroine got too curious, so she wants to imagine it. Walking over to the mirror, the first thing she decided to do was make that scary smile, as much as her facial muscles would allow her to. Fearfully looking in the mirror, Selena wondered if this was the face of the past Selena that made her so feared. As soon as the protagonist even imagined the possible face of the former Selena, the maids who had been looking at her all this time immediately became afraid for themselves. They became so scared that drops of sweat appeared on their faces. Due to the reaction of the maids, the girl realized that she would no longer portray such emotions on her face, because it was clear from the maids that they were very scared for themselves. Selena realized that she wasn't exactly good at smiling. To catch her breath a bit, one of the maids asked Mistress Selena which jewelry from the ones Aiden brought was the best. Before that, the maid even asked the heroine if she was okay. The protagonist once again wanted to answer that she would choose the leftmost jewelry of all, but then she was interrupted by a man's voice, who said that in his opinion, it would fit specifically those jewelry. That man turned out to be Mr. Lucas, who was also very prepared for Aaron's wedding. His clothes were quite exquisite, and they also hinted that he was the main rider of the duchy. He was looking at the protagonist with a sly smile. Lucas's strange behavior made Selena look at him with obvious displeasure and complaint. She asked him if it was etiquette to knock on the door before entering an aristocrat's room. In response to the claims, Lucas only said that the door to her room was originally open, and then the completely disappointed heroine in Lucas decided to tell him that it was the maids who forgot to close it as they were very busy. Thanks to that moment, she remembered that moment when she was walking along with Lucas and Aiden, and when she blatantly told him that she didn't want anything to do with him. Selena had thought that if she told him that, he would have realized that the aristocrat didn't even want him around, but that wasn't the case. Because of this, she remembered one outing when she decided to take a walk in the garden with Aiden for the umpteenth time, but they were joined by Lucas, who she even began to hate because of it. She remembered grudgingly asking him if he thought that she didn't need him to accompany her even to the wedding. At that moment, Lucas had the same sly smile on his face that he always showed Selena. Walking beside Selena, the man with long hair said that he just wanted to be by her side. From the expression on the protagonist's face, one could understand the fact that this answer did not satisfy her much. Even when the girl turned to Lucas and told him that she didn't want that, the warrior told her that even if she did, she had no choice, because the ducal family itself had ordered him to keep an eye on her. All of this the heroine of the story recalled as the maids did her hair on her head. She is glad at least that after that day he stopped making a gentleman of himself. But now, when she walks outside, he appears literally out of nowhere and behaves obsessively. Meanwhile, the maid who had been decorating the mistress's hair and preparing the hairstyle for her all this time stepped back a bit and told Selena that she had successfully finished her work. The gray-haired woman should have looked at herself in the mirror. However, the protagonist didn't even bother to look at herself. Instead, she looked at the maids, showing them her beautiful hairstyle, a dress with a neckline, and gemstone earrings that only adorned her image. The beauty of the main character made absolutely all the maids look at her like a goddess. But even more, they were surprised and mesmerized by the fact that Selena herself praised them for their efforts, saying that she looked good. Immediately after that, all the maids decided to bow to the mistress, while Selena herself looked at them with a slightly surprised face. The girls bowed as low as they could to her. The girl realized that her maids were a little scared, which she decided based on their appearance. She continued to stare at them, realizing that if this was the real Selena, she would never praise them for their work. Even as the maids hurriedly removed themselves from the mistress's room, they continued to tell each other what Selena had praised them for. The protagonist realized that they were happy about it, but she felt a little sorry for them because they appeared to be living under the evil Selena's control all the time. All this time, Lucas, who hadn't gone anywhere since he appeared in the aristocrat's room, was also looking at the protagonist. He didn't say anything, just looking at her already without a sly smile. Selena also looked at him as if she didn't understand what he wanted from her. There was the usual emotion of emptiness, calmness, or some kind of indifference on her face. She looked at him, waiting for a response. However, Lucas only smiled at the protagonist, giving her as kind a smile as he could do. Then the protagonist realized that if she tried to smile the same way, she would look clumsy, and she should learn how to smile from Lucas. After that, the main character decided to break the silence, asking Lucas why he decided to come here, because the girl immediately understands that she will not go out, because she is going to her brother's engagement party. Lucas put his hand on his heart, answering the outraged heroine that he came to accompany her at the wedding of Aaron and Ariel, so he asks for permission not to do so. He also said that he understood the fact that he came in advance without warning her, but Selena didn't like that. She continued to sit on the chair, telling a nicely dressed Lucas that it didn't have to be done because she would ask Aiden for it. But Lucas wasn't about to give up. Selena's words, of course, incensed Lucas, because once again, she was emphasizing Aiden while choosing to ignore him. He scratched his head, trying to think of something he would say to the perpetually disgruntled mistress. Then Lucas decided to speak up. He told Selena that Aiden was only a servant in the castle, not a warrior. Even if he was close to the Duchess, it was unacceptable. And if an aristocrat is accompanied by a servant, it might give a negative impression to the public. The protagonist was not surprised by Lucas's words. She looked down, realizing that social classes were important to someone like Lucas, which she herself had not thought about at first. Strange thoughts were increasingly filling her head. She touched her neck jewelry with her hand, realizing that everything was arranged in a certain way in this world. She realized that the aristocrats wouldn't even lift a finger because they would be completely prepared by the servants, just like her this morning. It was only through this realization that the girl realized that Aiden had been behind her all her time because she was an aristocrat. When Lucas would accompany her and talk to her, Aiden would only walk behind them because his status is lower. At some points, when she was sitting in the garden with Lucas, he was just there, only to run the errands that aristocrats would give him. All he had to do was observe everything. Sometimes he wished he could get away from it all altogether, but he couldn't, as it was his duty to be around the aristocrats at all times. So he would often sit in a chair while Lucas and Selena would talk amongst themselves, as befitted the aristocrats. Through all these thoughts, the girl realized that Aiden was not allowed to go where the aristocracy gathered this time either. She remembered his sweet face, realizing that he was far from worthy of such treatment. Then, with everything in her head, she opened her lips and mumbled that she understood what Lucas was trying to tell her. Who had tried so hard to always be there for her? She told Lucas that she had one question for him. Placing her elbows on the chair, Selena's first order of business was to look fearlessly at the one who was clearly taking advantage of social classes. With Lucas standing right in front of her, she bluntly asked him what it was about him that made him treat her like garbage. The heroine's boldness made Lucas smile to hide the real emotion of surprise. He didn't think that Selena, that person who had only enjoyed his status before, would ask him why he treated all servants so low. After that, the girl decided to wave her hand with the same indifference to Lucas, showing that she supposedly accidentally said something wrong. Selena looked at Lucas and informed him that she meant the aristocrats, not him. To this, a slightly perturbed Lucas replied to the mistress that they were also aristocrats, as Selena was telling him. He started waving his arms around, getting into an argument with the aristocrat over social class. The protagonist decided to say everything straightforwardly and without any unnecessary hints. Resting her chin on her hand, she answered Lucas with the same indifferent eyes she had before. She said that in that case, he was just as much trash as the rest of them. The insults in his direction, Lucas took with a smile. It was a defensive reaction, because in fact he understood perfectly well the fact that Mistress clearly wanted to humiliate him personally. He placed a hand on his hip and looked at Mistress with a stern look. Lucas calmly told her, maul if she was like that, then he agreed with her. It was evident from the main rider of the duchy that he accepted Selena's challenge. When the protagonist heard him laughing because of his words, she realized that she didn't want to talk to him that much anymore. She thought it was like he was the main villain rather than the hero in the novel. Plus, she instantly changed her mind about taking lessons from him on how to smile spectacularly. Lucas continued to stand right in front of Selena, and then she had to ask him what else he wanted from her. The aristocrat told the smiling guard that if he said everything he needed to, then let him go. But when she realized that Lucas wasn't going to leave so easily, she told him a little embarrassed that she wanted to do something before the ceremony, so she asked him to get Aiden here before he left. Hearing the main character's requests, a smiling Lucas immediately turned around, saying, Molly, if that was the case, then of course he would do it. The man's strange behavior was noticed by Selena, who kept an eye on him. But when Lucas went to the door, he turned sharply to the heroine, telling her that it turned out that it was not even necessary to call Aiden, because he was always standing there. Behind Lucas, Aiden did indeed appear. As he continued talking, Lucas said that not only was there no need for him to be here, but he had come in right after the noblewoman had called him. While the cunning Lucas spoke, Aiden only remained silent as he bowed to his mistress. The strange words towards her greatly puzzled the protagonist. She looked at Lucas as if she wanted to hear from him the real intentions that caused him to so humiliate the loyal servant right in front of her. Lucas in turn looked at the heroine as if he wanted to show her that the whole social class system was correct. Because of his sly smile, he was giving away his plans to teach Selena a lesson by making her think about who was trash and who he thought wasn't. But Aiden in turn continued to look at Selena with a face like his good mood was gone. He had probably heard Lucas and Selena's conversation all along perfectly well about how he was more insignificant because he was always out the door. Because of the main character's words, Aiden had to remember his childhood. He remembers being in a dark alley where there were no people. He wishes that the main character would learn about who could be considered real trash. He remembers being beaten up by a mob of teenagers when he himself was just a kid who ran around the street for days. He endured hunger, cold, and pain, all the while trying to keep warm in only a tattered sweatshirt and pants. Aiden recalls that at that time, love, kindness, and warmth were just words from a fairy tale to him. But at the time, he didn't even realize he was being seen by a girl who was dressed in warm red clothing. The teenagers who had beaten Aiden eventually left, laughing at him and telling each other that they had had a good time. The boy lay on the cold floor, still shaking from the cold and unbearable pain. That's when the one who wanted to change his life drastically came to him. And unlike him, she had beautiful and warm clothes, along with boots, because then the time was moving towards a very cold winter. The shaking boy decided to look at the one who now stood before him. He had numerous bruises and wounds on his face and body from the beatings, but he didn't even have something to help him heal from them. That girl turned out to be the little protagonist, who was looking at him curiously because Aiden seemed interesting to her. She was also accompanied by her parents, the Duke and stepmother, who looked ambiguously at the beaten vagrant. Then Aiden couldn't forget how the same girl with blue eyes had told him that he had a rather nice face, after which she suggested he go to her. Aiden realized that this was an aristocrat and properly a chance for salvation. Aiden remembers being very surprised by Selena at that moment because she was like a ray of light that shone only on him. He held out his hand to her, not even realizing that so many vagrants who had no home would die in the coming cold winter. He squeezed the little aristocrat's hand, realizing that if he agreed to her request, he could at least survive. He looked at her as if she was a true angel to him for salvation. Growing up, Aiden remembered the way that kind girl had held his hand. He thought if he didn't let go of her hand, she would take him to a beautiful world, like in fairy tales, where there was only love and kindness. That was when he became the personal servant of young Mistress Selena, a position she had personally chosen for him. The boy smiled, thinking that Selena was an angel to him, who saved him from a horrible, cold life on the streets. But one day, that illusion shattered with a crash. Aiden remembers that day very well, when it was very dark and the past, angry Selena already wanted to scold him for something. When still young and small Aiden looked right in front of the former Selena, she threw a rag at him as if he was trash here. It was then that the boy realized that his mistress was actually no angel at all. Selena yelled at him so hard, as if she was trying to take absolutely all her anger out on this boy she had saved before. She yelled at him and questioned why he couldn't even do that, after which she ordered him to make things right. It was then that Aiden realized one small thing. As he stood with his head down in front of Selena, who was yelling at him, he realized that he had become not just a personal servant of his mistress, but a lightning rod for her anger. However, Aiden would still never be able to forget the girl's kind smile as she reached out to him. At that moment, he had mistakenly thought that she was his savior, but now all his expectations had evaporated. In fact, the girl had said slightly different words at that moment that Aiden might not have noticed. When she found him and held out her hand, she told him bluntly, with a sly smile, that he would obey only her from now on. That was when she held out her hand to him, already commanding him to follow her wherever she went. It was those words that had been ingrained in the boy's memory, causing him to now always be ready to help her, being there for her around the clock. While the boy with a happy smile extended his hand to his savior, happy that he was smiling at his good fortune, Selena continued to say that from now on he was her property, since she had saved him. The villainess only wanted to use the boy. Aiden ended up placing his hand on Selena's palm, hoping that his life would get better. He remembers that the girl's words had given him hope and warmed his heart then, but now he realized that it was only an illusion. However, Aiden had no choice. He was forced to grow up in a ducal family, watching the aristocrats often having lunch and dinner together, like the happy families Aiden had dreamed of when reading fairy tales. Aiden slowly grew to realize that young Mr. Aaron had always shown himself to be at his best as the heir to the Earl family. For this, he received a great deal of attention from his parents, and was a favorite. But Mrs. Selena, who was also growing up, could no longer hide her evil character, because she secretly looked at her brother's successes and envied him, wanting to achieve something similar, so that she was also loved by her parents. There were times when the former, older Selena would throw books on the floor, yelling at someone with all her might and anger. She would ask everyone why her brother knew more than her, since they were both learning from the same books. This made Selena very angry. The little girl was so angry that she was already ready to throw the other book as well. Of course, she was thinking about how it was all Aiden's fault. She was asking him angrily why he didn't pick up all the books this week from the library and how many volumes Aaron had gotten. Aiden didn't even know what to answer the evil mistress. He was getting very worried, telling the villainess that he was having trouble answering anything regarding Mr. Aaron's reading. But the girl's anger was already at its limit. She began pointing her finger at him in anger, shouting at him that he was completely useless, and she had only sheltered him so that he would at least be useful in some way. These words greatly upset the boy, who could not fight back against the aristocrat. At that moment, he tried to settle the situation. Putting his hand on his chest, he asked the villainess what he could do. The boy told the mistress to just say so. After that, he would do anything. But Selena only grumbled at him, saying that he only had to chew things up. The girl kept pointing her finger at Aiden, ordering him to find out what books his brother was studying, so that she would do better than him at the family dinner next week. The girl even said it would be better if he stole those books. Aiden realized that wasn't very nice. He doubted himself, which was evident in the worried expression on his face. He wanted to tell the Gosapia that it was wrong, but he kept stammering out of fear and anxiety. In response, Selena only looked at her acolyte even more fiercely, wondering if he couldn't do this too. In the eyes of the villainess was a clear desire for her goal, along with anger at everyone. Then the girl could not stand it. Spewing out all her rage, she pushed Aiden back with all her might, shouting at him that he was really a real wimp who was good for nothing. The girl even said that she had picked him up off the street for nothing then. Selena was really angry, so she didn't even stop to yell at the boy. She continued to shower him with accusations and anger, saying that he wasn't even able to bring tea normally like a normal servant. Only after that did the girl decide to turn away, still looking at Aiden with a fury that she had never had before. She told him loudly again that she didn't even want to see him here, after which she ordered him away. But there wasn't even a face on poor Aiden, who still couldn't stand up for himself. His eyes were as sad as possible after something like that. He quietly told the girl that he understood her order, after which he apologized for everything. Because the boy endured beatings and violence every day, he became withdrawn. He would often sit on his bed at night, thinking about how much Selena hated him. It was simply unbearable and humiliating for him. Reflecting on his miserable life, the boy at one point looked at the window, which was frozen with frost. He sat alone in the room because he essentially had no friends or parents to take care of him. Aiden realized one truth then. If his mistress hadn't picked him up off the street that day, he would have definitely frozen to death from the intense cold that was then hitting the duchy. But he still felt sad about the whole situation. After that, the boy rolled over to his other side, trying to sleep. He told himself to hang in there, and he was very lucky that the cold and strong winds didn't touch him, because now at least he had this room. However, when he turned 18, and when he was putting up with more of his mistress's antics every day, he began to wonder with sad eyes how his past life was different from the one he has now. He remembers that day very well, because that was when Mistress's brother Aaron graduated from the academy as the top student, causing Selena to go wild with anger. She was tearing the room to splinters, yelling at Aiden to get out of here as soon as possible. The girl even pointed at his sad, devastated expression. She was pointing her finger at him, asking him what the blank emotion on his face was, and saying that if he couldn't do anything for her, then let him get out of here. Then the main character, who was angry at everyone, did something that would have shocked anyone. She threw a heavy box at Aiden out of anger. It hit him hard on the head, making an unpleasant sound. The casket fell to the stone floor right under Aiden's feet, but now there was blood clearly visible on its beautiful pattern. It was the blood of a guy who had always tried to serve Selena, and who was willing to put up with her temper day after day. Shocked at what was happening, Aiden opened his eyelids, feeling an incredibly intense pain in the area of his head. He could feel a drop of blood slowly dripping from his head that he couldn't stop so easily. At that moment, Selena noticed the blood on the guy's face. She was very scared, telling him that it was blood. Selena wasn't afraid for the guy's life, but she was afraid of the blood that she must have seen for the first time on a human, that is, on her servant. However, the lad did not cry out in pain or do anything else. He just continued to perform his duties, with blood pouring into his wounds. He asked Selena if she was okay, not him. Selena continued to look at the guy with horror because she sees blood on his head. This really freaks her out, and she can't even get the words out, only fearfully telling Aiden that he has blood on his face. Aiden continued to perform his duties with the wound on his head. When it continued to bleed heavily, he only told the girl that he was fine, but if he stayed like that, the mistress might be worried about him. After that, the guy decided to move away from the shocked Selena into the hallway, saying that he apologized to her for such inexcusable behavior, also informing her that he would send someone else now. Selena was even startled by the fact that there was blood on Aiden's gloves as well. The guy then walked leisurely towards his room, as large drops of blood from his head fell onto the stone floor. He didn't want to scare Selena, so he acted like he wasn't hurt at all, and it was nothing. But when he had already moved so far away from Selena's room that she could no longer hear his footsteps, he ran with all his might away from her, as more and more drops of his maroon blood dripped onto the floor. He wanted to get to his room as soon as possible. He tried to run with all his might so that he wouldn't at least pass out from the pain and blood loss. The red liquid dripped more and more from his head, making Aiden run harder and harder from Selena to his cramped bunk. While running, he even held his palm in his fist, the glove of which was definitely bloody as well. He was probably very angry with Selena, but right now it was very important for him to get to his place so that no one else could see him. With these thoughts, he stormed into his room, which was still empty, lonely, and quiet. He could feel the picture in his eyes already starting to darken with pain, but he wouldn't let himself faint on the floor. His bloody hands did reach the table, though, because Aiden had less and less strength. He put his hands on the table with such helplessness that he hoped he could at least endure this hellish pain. It was then that the boy realized that something had broken inside him. He still remembers the way he cried in his room as blood dripped into his head. The one who saved him threw the box at his head out of anger, to intentionally hurt him. But Aiden also had a strong desire to hurt Selena. Realizing all of this, Aiden clenched his hands into a fist as his own blood spread across the table. He realized that he hated Selena with all his heart and wanted to repay her with what she had done to him. He tried not to give up or cry, even though his emotions were very strong. He anxiously wiped his tears and blood from his face as he pondered on what life was better, outside in the cold and hunger, or with Selena beating him to a bloody pulp. Then a great many tears flowed from Aiden's eyes, which he held back year after year. He remembers not crying when he was beaten in the street, not crying when Selena scolded him and called him worthless. But now he couldn't hold back any longer. Aiden realized that he had been betrayed right before his eyes. That feeling alone made him worry so much that it was as if everything around him was stuck in a web of sadness and hopelessness that would be hard for him to get out of. But just when he felt that everything was lost, and he was finally betrayed by everyone, a strange substance appeared behind him, flying in the air and emitting a magical violet-white light. Aiden decided to pay attention to it by looking back. There was even smoke coming from the strange thing, which only looked very strange. At that moment, the guy stopped crying, turning his attention to the strange phenomenon. It turns out that the purple and white light wasn't just levitating in space, it was circling around a distressed Aiden. He stared at that thing, not realizing what it was or what it was for. But he probably already knew the answer to that question because of his speculation. Holding out his hands with the magical thing that clearly wanted to say something to Aiden, the guy realized that it wasn't just a strange phenomenon of nature, but real magic that had chosen him. This made Aiden feel shocked. After Aiden realized everything, he continued to stare in wonder at the magic that stopped right in front of his face. It continued to emit a magical light, which made it easy to realize that it was a magic thing. When the magic ball became right in front of the surprised Aiden, it became even bigger, because of which it created another magic circle around itself. This surely meant that this was the culmination of the magic, the beginning of its effect. Finishing its transformation into a greater power, the magic flew to Aiden's hands, then became very small, so small that it fit in his hand. Aiden still stared at it in amazement, holding out his hands to it. It was then that the guy realized that this wasn't all his hallucination, but a very real weapon that could kill even Selena, for example. He looked at her as if it was magic that had given him the chance to set things right. Looking at his bloody gloved hands and the magic that swirled in front of him in the form of a small ball of smoke, Aiden finally realized that his cry for help and pain was able to turn into such magic. Then he laughed slyly, putting more puzzles together in his head as to how he could use this magic for his own purposes. His head was still bleeding as he thought of an ingenious plan. Staring at the blob of magic with devastated and malicious eyes, Aiden realized that it was not ordinary blood that had been flowing in his veins all this time, but the true blood of mages. Then he wondered if he could kill Selena with that power. For a moment, he even pictured in his head Selena's reaction when she found out. Aiden pondered over what Selena's reaction would be when she realized that her personal servant wasn't so useless and worthless after all. For one moment, the boy imagined even his own reaction, wondering how he would already feel the moment he realized that the very same loyal servant would force her to die, bringing her tragic end closer. Aiden had even more thoughts regarding what he would become when he could rid himself of Selena. He looked at the magic and laughed evilly, realizing that now he could see the end of his agony and pain in this house. But at the same time, the boy realized that there was no hurry. He looked somewhere to the side, silently rejoicing for the fact that he now had in his pocket the most important trump card, thanks to which he could defeat Selena. He clenched his hand into a fist, thus compressing the magic he had received. Aiden made the decision not to speak of his magical power for now, preferring to hide it for the best time to deal with his mistress. In that instant, Aiden thought about visiting the wizard's tower first and asking if they would accept him, imagining the very tower he was thinking of, because he doesn't know if his suddenly appearing magic is any good at all. Then, thinking carefully that perhaps his reckless thoughts might get him thrown out of the wizard tower and then out of the palace, Aiden decided that he should act more pragmatically and cunningly. The boy continued to worship Selena and perform all her duties as he had before deciding to hide his magical power and just tolerate Selena further as she had done before. He remembers constantly continuing to court Selena even after she threw the box at him. It was hard on his mind due to the fact that his mistress's attitude towards him had gotten a little softer after that incident. Aiden vividly remembered the way Selena still let him look at her with disdain sometimes, but she no longer spoke nasty words to him or tried to smash his head in. She never apologized for her horrible behavior, which wasn't surprising because she had a very mean temper. Aiden himself was also doing his chores, trying not to look Selena in the eye. He held a grudge against her too, realizing that this was all as cheesy as possible from the outside. He didn't like it all, but he tolerated it. And now, When Aiden as usual stood in the corridor and waited for orders from his mistress, he clearly heard her saying that some people were trash and some were not. This hurt the faithful servant because he could only consider her as trash, who always mocked him. But despite this, Aiden continued to silently do his job, as if he hadn't heard all this. He even scoffed a little at Selena, realizing that she was still a hypocrite who didn't remember her past self. Selena's loyal servant continued to follow her as the protagonist went to check on her brother before the marriage ceremony. While she was talking to him, Aiden looked at her and realized that from her lips, the words about garbage were just funny, but he still didn't fully understand what she was up to and what her plan was. Suddenly, right in front of her brother, Selena dropped to the floor to bow to Aaron. This surprised Aiden and Aaron so much that you could already tell from their faces that they didn't expect this from the main character at all. Then Aiden, alarmed by the situation, once again asked himself what could be on the mind of this girl, who now behaves completely differently, while having lost her memory due to the fall. It turns out that Selena, who fell on her knees in front of her brother, told him that now, when he would apologize to her for something, she would fall on her knees, convincing him that the problem was her, not him, and she was the only one to blame. However, Aaron continued to embarrassingly apologize to his sister for things he may or may not have done for her before. He scratched his shoulder in embarrassment, while the protagonist looked at him with an incomprehensible face. In response, Selena looked at Aaron and told him once again that if he apologized to her every time, everyone around him would think that she didn't respect him. After that, a confused Aaron just agreed with the girl's words and asked her to stand up. The girl continued talking to her brother while looking at Aiden and asking him to help her get up from her knees. Of course, Aiden, as a loyal servant, couldn't help but help the main character. He helped the dressed-up girl stand up, while Selena herself brushed the excess dirt from the floor off her dress. And Aaron still felt awkward about his sister, allowing herself to fall to her knees in front of him. After the heroine stood up, she decided to make a crowning curtsy, telling her brother that she sincerely congratulates him on the celebration of his engagement. She also informed him that she had specifically come in advance to congratulate him. Aaron looked at his sister and couldn't believe that she had finally changed for the better. Tears even flowed from his eyes as he looked at her and thanked her for such sincere words and congratulations. Selena continued to stand still, talking to her brother. Aiden stood behind her at this time as well, realizing why she needed to walk around the castle before Aaron and Ariel's marriage ceremony. Aiden realized that Selena had a desire to personally congratulate all the family members, something she had never done before, and which was very surprising to the thoughtful lad. He marveled at her behavior, realizing that she had truly changed. Aiden's assumptions turned out to be correct, because after the girl visited her brother, she went to the room of the holy maiden Ariel and congratulated her in the same way, from which the bride was very happy, hugging Selena. Aiden himself continued to follow Selena, helping her with something. As they walked down the hallway, they were silent, not making any unnecessary noises. Selena moved to her parents' room to congratulate them on the ceremony as well. When the protagonist got closer to the door behind which was the room of the former Selena's parents' room, she stopped because all sorts of different sad thoughts started coming into her head. Aiden stopped as well. Sad Selena realized that when her parents looked at her joyfully, she was looking into the eyes of the former Selena, not the real eyes of the main character. It was frustrating for her because the girl couldn't even call out of mommy and daddy like a loving daughter. For a moment, she imagined the Duke and Mother happy, kind, and smiling, thinking about what would happen if they found out that she was not their daughter, but only a soul who borrowed the body of the past, evil and treacherous Selena. With such thoughts, the protagonist knocked on their door after all. She realizes that after such a thing, she does not even want to see them, but she is obliged to fulfill her duty to them and show that she is no longer the one she used to be. After the girl knocked, she also loudly told her parents that it was Selena, so that they did not hesitate and quickly opened the door to her. The heroine wants to establish a relationship with them as soon as possible by showing her new self. However, after Selena knocked on the door and said that it was her, no noise came further. She was silent for a moment, realizing that most likely no one would ever come out to see her. The girl wasn't too upset. She just turned around, getting ready to leave with the thoughts that probably the parents were probably not here to get along. But for her, it was good from some side, because she didn't want to talk to them anyway. But the protagonist should have just tried to leave. as she was immediately stopped by the noise due to the fact that the stepmother opened the doors of her room with a menacing look, then a little frightened Selena, who looked at her. The seriousness of the noble lady quickly disappeared when she saw her own daughter in front of her. She immediately hugged Selena, saying her name sweetly. You could tell by the look on her face that she was overjoyed at her arrival. Maybe she even missed the main character. The mother's hug surprised the protagonist a lot, because she remembers how they just yesterday had dinner together at the table. But the Duchess still hugged Selena so tightly that the girl was even more surprised by it. The Duchess even said that it was a beautiful day for her just because she was visiting them. Soon, the Duchess and the protagonist also came out to see the Duchess and the protagonist, who is the father to Selena. He also looked happy, asking his daughter if she came to congratulate them on the ceremony and telling her that she is a great girl. The heroine's father even admitted that it was the best day of their lives. The girl looked at her parents and held back from crying. She was touched by the fact that they even looked happy, showing her their smiles, kindness, affection, warm words, and friendliness. The heroine became even more saddened when she realized that these were all things she couldn't get from her real family from her past life. She pressed her lip, trying not to cry while there was already a bitter lump in her throat. She realizes that she feels not only the bitterness in her throat, but also a shiver all over her body that only came from the nice words and caresses of the Duchess and Duke. But the heroine calms herself, mentally saying that she is not the real Selena. Looking at Selena's happy parents, the girl realized that the Duke and Duchess want to see not her, but their daughter, whom they love so much. And although it is a new life, the heroine realizes that their love does not belong to her. The new Selena realized that she should be more often conscious of her position in the second life, thanks to which she will be able to get rid of the pain that she can get because of the longing for the love and affection of parents. Realizing all of this and accepting it as fact, Selena and her soul finally calmed down. She exhaled deeply, about to do what she had actually come to the Duke and Duchess's room to do. She lifted her head, looking up at her parents with calm eyes, and daring to call them Mommy and Daddy. She had dared to do it after all, even though she had previously thought that she wouldn't even be able to utter those difficult words for her. Selena's parents could see that they were very happy when they heard from the heroine such nice words in their direction. The stepmother was the first to ask her daughter a question, asking her what she wanted, calling her a sweet daughter. She was also happy for the fact that Selena's memory was probably starting to come back to her. What surprised Selena's parents even more was that their daughter threw her arms around them, closing her eyes and thanking them for not abandoning her and caring for her with such affection. The Duchess and the Duke were pleasantly shocked by this. In response, the stepmother hugged the protagonist even harder, asking her, what is she saying, and telling her that it was their duty since she is their daughter. Selena continued to hug her mom, while the Duke laughed and jokingly said that for the marriage ceremony, and Selena decided to get smart. After the parents and daughter had had their fill of hugs, the Duke and Duchess said goodbye to Selena, shouting to her that they would meet her again already during the ceremony. At that moment, the protagonist realized that children feel from their parents incredible affection and love. Returning back, the protagonist looked forward and mentally talked to the old Selena, asking her why she was so angry and what she was not satisfied with in such a beautiful family that she did not listen to her parents. What upset the heroine even more was that the former Selena was rejecting all the things she could only dream of. Selena was angry at her parents, who loved her, at her brother, who constantly apologized to her, even at Aiden, whom she had saved as a child. The girl continued walking down the corridor, into which sunlight was streaming in from the windows. The protagonist of the story still wants to understand why exactly she moved into Selena Howitt's body. The protagonist continued to walk down the hallway that seemed foreign to her. She thinks about the fact that when she saw it for the first time, she did not notice anything remarkable. Because of this, she does not understand what has changed. Suddenly, the girl stopped right in the middle of the hallway because of the strange thoughts in her head. Aiden noticed this and became a little wary. He called her mistress to understand the girl's suspicious behavior. Turns out the protagonist needed Aiden. She called out to him, looking somewhere in the floor, apparently about to say something to him. The guy came closer to the heroine and, touching her shoulders, asked what was wrong. Turning to Aiden, Selena asked him a question that surprised the loyal servant greatly. She looked at him and asked if she had met him for the first time in that dark street, lying in rags and beaten. A chill ran through Aiden. He looked into Selena's eyes in surprise, because all this time he'd thought she wouldn't even remember his name, but here she remembered even their first meeting as children. But soon the guy calmed down, because he realized that here he wouldn't be able to hide something from Selena, because it was true. He sighed, not understanding why the protagonist decided to suddenly remember it. He decided to still be polite and kind to Selena, who wasn't like that with him, it seemed, ever. He looked at her with a smile and said it was like that while the girl herself looked at him emotionlessly. Then the protagonist looked at Aiden with a look as if she wanted to ask him something more soul-searching and important. The girl asked him if she had heard him that time when she scolded him once again. With her lips, the protagonist asked Aiden a clearer question, asking if she was the one who threw that heavy box at him, after which blood came out of his head. The heroine likely feels guilty about that too. That question alone made Aiden feel sick. Everything seemed to go dark around him when, just because of the words of the main character, he remembered everything he felt that night. He remembers that he felt really bad at the time. It was difficult for him to say the words, because it is a real trauma for him, which he preferred not to remember, but to remember only in order to take revenge on Selena later. But he wasn't going to lie to the girl. He looked at Mrs. Selena already without a smile or politeness, saying that such a thing happened too. He doesn't know what exactly Selena wants to accomplish, but he will tell the truth even if he doesn't like it. The protagonist looked at Aiden with the same surprise, as if she realized why he had something against her all these years. In fact, the heroine had only found out through reading the novel, but now she only had to look at someone who had put up with Selena's temper since childhood. In the end, the girl couldn't look into the eyes of someone she had wronged years ago, and so never apologized for it. She quickly walked forward while Aiden stood in the hallway and remained silent, feeling awkward. The main character realized that this was indeed the novel she had read in a past life. She had asked Aiden this only because she wanted to make sure if this was the wild story she had been reincarnated into, and it looked like the heroine's hunch was correct. The girl was walking down the corridor and fixing her hair on her head, realizing that everything she had just checked was somehow in the novel, and it gave her irrefutable proof that she was now living in the world of the novel called Crown of Dawn. In addition, the protagonist realizes that with each such check, she becomes more and more convinced that she doesn't belong here. With such thoughts, the girl touched her cleavage, as if she felt sick. She realizes that for absolutely all people, she is actually a stranger, and they all do not even suspect it, thinking that she has lost her memory. With such thoughts, the heroine walked down the corridor, while the silent Aiden did the same. All these thoughts do not give the protagonist peace. She does not want to live in such a world where she receives undeserved love from her parents, brother, and relatives, because they still think that Selena has remained the same. The heroine of the story walked down the stairs with increasingly scary thoughts haunting her. She doesn't understand why she needs the love and affection from everyone that she wants so badly from everyone if she ends up dying in a couple of days. Walking down the stairs, she's still trying to figure out why she needs all these false hopes and feelings, if in the end, she'll never be able to get used to her new body, or her family, or the world because she isn't herself here. Tilting her head back, the girl realized that this is all annoying her beyond belief. She wants to end it all soon, so she doesn't have to feel the shame, the false love and care and friendship in this world. With these thoughts, the protagonist continued down the long stone steep staircase to the bottom. At one point, it hit her, as if she felt like she could end it all in an instant. Aiden, who had been following Selena all this time, noticed perfectly that at one moment, as the mistress was descending the stairs, she began to fall downward abruptly. Her hair rose upwards as the girl's body abruptly began to fall. Aiden himself noticed this and couldn't contain his emotions. He looked in amazement at the girl who suddenly decided to fall down as if something had come over her. It took Aiden a second to realize that something terrible was happening. He held out his hand to the heroine in shock, shockingly shouting to her mistress to stop. His eyes read terror and fear because he realizes that Selena could be about to die from falling down the stairs. Aiden reached out his hand to the falling girl as close as he could, but even that wasn't enough to at least grab her by the elements of her clothing or her arm. Selena continued to tumble downward. The guy clenched his hand into a fist, trying to grab the girl's arm, but even that didn't help him. It was too late to react in time, so Aiden missed his chance to save his mistress. But Aiden didn't give up. He kept running up the stairs behind the falling heroine, reaching out to her and hoping that he could grab her with one hand. But while he was trying to save her, Aiden had no idea how Selena felt in the shower. The girl looked at Aiden with devastated eyes as she waited for the fall and her death. She deliberately threw herself down the stairs because the thought of a hard world and love from everyone made her end her life in this world. She looked at Aiden, who tried his best to save her from falling, and realized that even from him she can't get any apology or gratitude. The girl realizes that she is useless to her family and friends. However, the protagonist continued to look with her empty eyes at Aiden and think that after all, he is the only person to whom the past Selena treated more or less favorably and not with anger. The heroine of the story looked intently at the man who was desperately trying to save her. She didn't understand why at one point his face began to portray anger or sadness, as if he didn't want her long-awaited death. Selena wasn't going to rethink her decision because it was too late. She only smiled at the guy who had dedicated his life to her, thinking about the fact that he had incredibly beautiful golden hair. Aiden himself, however, wasn't happy about it. He realized that he wouldn't be able to save the girl just like that, and even good physical shape wouldn't help him. Then he made a decisive decision. In an instant, his eyes lit up with a bright green light. By this time, the protagonist herself had already closed her eyes to meet her long-awaited death. But she didn't even realize that a very bright, magical light had appeared around her, which only grew larger underneath her. The bright light was shining through the blue hair of the protagonist as she waited for her own death. It was this light that kept the girl from falling onto the stone staircase to bid farewell to life once and for all. The light continued to dazzle all around, giving Aiden the time and opportunity to reach his hands right under Selena's body to save her. For some reason, the one who wanted to kill Selena himself wanted to save her from death as soon as possible, and with his magic, which Aiden used to save Selena, he was still able to make sure that the mistress didn't fall to the stone floor. He appeared right in front of her, after which he stretched out his arms to catch her. Moments later, the mistress's loyal servant caught the girl in his arms, while she herself did not even open her eyes, wanting to feel the long-awaited death. But this time, she was not destined to finish her story in the new world. The guy also lowered the girl to the floor with such care and courtesy, as if for him, this was no longer the person he so wanted to kill for being bullied, beaten, and humiliated by the past mistress. He exhaled at the end, realizing that he had been able to do what seemed impossible already. He had been able to save the girl while using his magic to do so. But even from the beginning, he had wanted to hide her so that he could kill her in an instant. After that, the guy looked at Selena, calling her name and hoping that she was all right. Aiden did his duty despite the fact that he had genuinely hated Selena all the time since she was a child. Selena opened her eyes and looked at her savior puzzled. There was a slight look of surprise on her face, but she was still unable to express strong emotions due to her devastation and sincere desire to die. The girl looked up at the ladder she had just fallen from. Looking at its height and steep descent, she realized that if she had fallen from it, she would have definitely broken her neck. But that didn't happen thanks to Aiden. The guy wanted to ask the protagonist if she was okay, but he couldn't do it, because Selena immediately covered his mouth with her hand, forcing him not to utter the last words. The girl's behavior really surprised Aiden. Instead of asking her about her condition, he became silent because Selena herself wanted him to. She continued to keep her fingers on the guy's lips, questioning why he did it. The protagonist looked at Aiden and completely calmly, as if nothing terrible had happened, asked why he had saved her. Selena was still as devastated and unemotional as she had been before. Aiden himself didn't even understand Selena's question. He continued to stare at her shocked as the girl's hand forced his lips to stay still. Selena seemed to be aware of the fact that he actually wanted to get rid of her, but she doesn't understand why he suddenly decided to save her. Soon the couple was approached by witnesses of what happened, who were shocked by the horrible events. They turned out to be maids, who immediately began to ask the mistress what happened to her and whether she was okay. Aiden looked at Selena carefully, not understanding exactly what she wanted to get out of all of this. He listened to her as she told the servants that she was fine thanks to Aiden catching her, but she was a little dizzy. Aiden himself only had to kneel and listen to the conversations of the worried maids who feared for the condition of the protagonist. They were telling her to hurry up and go to her room because she was feeling a little sick and her dress was slightly wrinkled. The guy didn't bother to say anything, A few hours after Aiden had to save the heroine from death, they were both in a dark room where there was a cabinet with a set. Everyone was already finishing their work because the workday was coming to an end. Aiden, who was behind the protagonist, politely told her that he was about to call the maids, but Selena, who was looking at the floor, suddenly called out his name, making him stop and listen to her. Aiden was no longer wearing such vivid emotion. He was not smiling because Selena's abrupt desire to leave this world was a very disturbing and sad event for him. He looked at the heroine and asked him what she wanted. About to turn around to the guy, it was as if the soulless girl wanted to look at him, asking if he had accidentally used his magic when he saved her from falling down the stairs. It seemed that Selena had begun to guess everything herself, and she just needed confirmation of it. At the time the girl asked him this question while looking him in the eyes, Aiden couldn't even look at her, hiding his eyes behind his hair and lowering his head down, most likely feeling ashamed of something. Noticing the guy's strange emotions, Selena looked at him and told him that it wasn't his fault, and moreover, she didn't blame him for it, after which the girl asked him not to worry, while wondering if he always had that expression on his face. However, Aiden did not clearly answer his mistress's questions about magic. Instead, he closed his eyes and once again said that he would call the maids to her bedroom in order to remove himself for a short while. After that, Aiden silently walked out of Selena's chambers, closing the door behind him. Most likely, he does not want unnecessary questions from the protagonist, so he prefers to avoid them only because he cannot understand himself. Soon, Selena's faithful servant came out of the mistress's bedroom and hurried after the maids. He walked briskly down the hallway, ruminating in his head on what had already happened. Aiden remembers that he could not answer the girl's question as to why he had saved her. He even remembers the empty eyes of the protagonist, which after the loss of memory did not play with new colors. At that moment, she was waiting for an answer from him. But he himself could not understand why he did it, and what made him go to such a thing. All the thoughts made him unable to go any further. Aiden stopped, trying to figure out what had gotten into Selena, and even more so how he felt, who had decided to save the person he had considered an enemy his whole life, including his childhood. Aiden turned to the door behind which Selena was. He didn't understand what he was complaining about if he had made his own decision to save the main character from the death she most likely wanted so badly. He looked carefully at the door behind which Mrs. Selena was located. He is well aware of the fact that she didn't live like an aristocrat, but like a gossipy woman who always wanted to bully everyone and be the leader. At one point, the guy looked at his hands, trying to understand why he decided to save her. He seriously asked himself this question, but there was still no way he could think of an answer. He himself can't understand why he did it if he hates her. He knows and remembers very well that it was this person who humiliated him, made him cry and feel pain. Aiden remembers starting to feel pressure from her starting when he was a child, but it all stopped only when she supposedly lost her memory. Aiden realized that he had the perfect opportunity to kill her by simply making the decision not to save her, and then everyone would have thought she had truly thrown herself down the stairs. But for some reason, he didn't stand there and watch the falling mistress. All of this is very disturbing to the protagonist's faithful servant. Remembering her empty eyes, Aiden realized that he just couldn't stand there and watch her fall. It was against his principles and common sense, so he immediately made the decision to save her. Aiden also recalled his emotions at that moment as well. As he shockedly looked at the falling Selena, it seemed to him that everything around him had disappeared, and now he could only see her. It was then that he realized that he couldn't bear to just watch it. However, all these thoughts helped Aiden realize that from the very beginning, when he first met Selena, who had invited him into her home, and when he was very young, he hadn't actually wanted to kill her at all. Aiden remembers very well that Selena was angry with him, threw things at him, and once even hit him over the head with a jewelry box. But even at that moment, he didn't truly want to take revenge on her and take her life. Even when the protagonist became an adult, Aiden still habitually performed his duties, faithfully obeying her because all these years he had no desire to kill anyone. He felt it deep in his heart. After realizing all this, Aiden immediately burst into Selena's room, shouting her name. He had one wish that he urgently wanted to tell his mistress, and with this purpose, he so unexpectedly disturbed her peace. At this time, the protagonist was already removing unnecessary ornaments and jewelry in her hair because she was getting ready for sleep. She looked at Aiden in surprise as she said his name and didn't understand what he wanted. But Aiden had something urgent to tell her. Appearing in the room in front of Selena and lowering his head in embarrassment, the lad with a puff of breath really wanted to tell his mistress something he thought was very important. He tried to utter something to himself, after which he wanted to ask the heroine a question, but he couldn't do any of that because he was interrupted. The person who dared to put his words above those of the servant turned out to be Lucas, which was not surprising. He peeked out from behind the doorway, looking at Aiden and Selena and telling her that it was already time for the ceremony to begin, and he had come to escort her. Moving closer to the lady who was in front of the mirror, Lucas told her with a smile that her hair was a little disheveled, then asked if she had fallen somewhere. By this point, Aiden realized that he was not destined to become more frank with the lady. Turning to Aiden, Lucas hinted with a huff that he would need to call the maids to help Selena get dressed up as soon as possible. But there was absolutely no emotion on Aiden's face. Lucas couldn't help but notice the servant's strange and sad demeanor, as if he didn't like something. He looked at him with obvious anger and suspicion, then asked him sharply and also rudely why he froze. Only after that, Aiden came to his senses and began to perform his duties. He bowed slightly to Lucas, after which he apologized and said he would get the maids now. Lucas was still curious about his strange behavior, so he didn't take his eyes off of him. However, Aiden was stopped before he left by Selena, who didn't want to leave things to chance. She looked at him and told him to wait, then asked if he had anything he wanted to say to her. But in the presence of an aristocrat like Lucas, who only showed his status by his appearance, Aiden of course said that there was nothing special or important he wanted to tell Selena. Aiden had to leave, but he was still unhappy that he hadn't been able to tell Selena anything important to him just because of Lucas, who continued to stand in her room as if he was the only one she wanted to see in front of her. Lucas, on the other hand, saw Aiden off with a look. He looked at him with a small amount of jealousy and contempt, thinking that he was obviously lying and actually really wanted to tell his mistress something personal. After a while, everything was ready for the marriage ceremony of Aaron and Ariel, which continued in the duchy of the Hovite family. Sunlight fell on the ducal family's house as everyone prepared for the big event. Aristocrats from all over the lands had traveled to check on the couple. In the main hall itself, classical music was playing thanks to a live orchestra, which allowed the celebration to be filled with a magical, enchanting atmosphere of love and family happiness. Violinists and pianists tried their best to spread quality, beautiful music. Also, food and a variety of appetizers were already prepared on the tables for the ceremony. Each of the guests had their own plate with glasses and napkins prepared so that everyone would be comfortable. In addition to the aristocrats and the ducal family, which gathered at the feast, near the main table was already Lucas, who accompanied the main character and smiled at her as if she did not realize that he was a liar and a cheat. In fact, Lucas was only pretending to be a polite aristocrat, although he realizes that Selena has long since figured him out. But unlike Lucas, the protagonist still remained as if indifferent to everything that happens around her. She really dislikes Lucas himself, but she has already realized that no words will not make Lucas get away from her. The main character was not only looked at by Lucas as her guard, but also by the Duke and Duchess, who were already sitting in their seats and smiling at their daughter. Lucas pushed back Selena's chair, telling her to take a seat at the table. The dressed-up and beautiful protagonist decided to sit down at her seat without any questions or reproaches, while Lucas was going to sit next to her, adjusting her chair as comfortably as possible with the sly smile he always had. Meanwhile, the butlers too were beginning to gather before the festivities. One of them noticed something that Aiden, who had come to join them, a little late, and because of that, he decided to tell Selena's servant about it. But Aiden only smiled, apologizing for his tardiness. The head butler decided to be the one to announce to everyone the arrival of the bride and groom. He stood near the stairs, after which he loudly told everyone that the celebrants were about to come out, so they should greet them with loud applause. All the aristocrats smilingly started clapping their hands when the long-awaited couple, Aaron Hovite and the holy maiden Ariel, appeared in front of them. They looked at the bride and groom and clapped loudly for them. It was evident by Aaron and Ariel that they were just as happy to see everyone at their celebration. Groom looked at everyone with embarrassment and admiration, while the bride waved back at her guests, giving everyone her warm smile. While all of the aristocrats' attention was redirected to Aaron and Ariel, the groom himself didn't mind looking at his sister. His kind blue eyes were clearly directed at the heroine, showing his kindness and sincerity. Selena couldn't help but notice the fact that her brother was looking at her, not at her parents or the guests of the party. She looked at him too, noticing Aaron's gaze. Ariel, meanwhile, continued to wave to every guest who was excited about their party. Soon, Aaron decided to call out to Selena, hoping she would hear him, also waving to her as a greeting. He was very happy not only for the celebration, but also for the fact that his ever-evil sister was finally letting him feel happy and married. But Selena herself was in no hurry to wave back at her brother or say her most sincere wishes to him. Instead, she nudged her lip, feeling awkward and embarrassed that Aaron was looking at her like that. She was actually very uncomfortable for that reason, that he was well aware that he would soon be leaving this world of his own accord. There was sadness in her eyes as she saw her happy brother, who was not yet aware that the heroine wanted to leave the world of the living. Aaron noticed the fact that his sister seemed to be in a bad mood, causing her to not wave back at him. This made him wary, looking at his sister even more closely. This was soon noticed by Ariel as well, who turned to look at her flustered fiancé. Selena sat at the table not far away from her happy brother, still unable to decide to at least imagine the emotion of joy if she couldn't be genuinely happy for Aaron. She raised her hand, about to do something. In the end, the protagonist did raise her hand to her brother and waved to him, but she did it with such a face that one could immediately realize that it was given to her with great difficulty, because she had not felt any positive emotions for a long time. Only then did Aaron Howitt and the holy maiden Ariel become truly happy at their feast. They both waved to Selena with happy smiles, showing her that they were also very happy for her. The main character continued to wave to the bride and groom, before folding her hand and quietly whispering her wish to the now legitimate couple. It was as if she was addressing Ariel, calling her princess, and asking her to take care of Aaron. Immediately afterward, trumpeters with musical trumpets blasted a solemn melody throughout the hall, signifying that the grand beginning of the ceremony had already taken place. Aaron and Ariel were now legally husband and wife to each other. To a beautiful, festive tune, a servant loudly opened a bottle of champagne, which was immediately tilted so that the expensive champagne filled all the glasses of the guests, while a lot of confetti fell from the ceiling. All of the aristocrats watched in amazement as the pyramid of their clear, crystal glasses gradually filled up with the champagne that the servant poured for them. Everyone was delighted to be so festive and happy. After the announcement of the beginning of the wedding ceremony of Aaron and Ariel was over, and all the guests had eaten, all the aristocrats started talking to the Duchess and the Duke, telling them their impressions and various stories with a wide smile. Meanwhile, the protagonist was still strolling along with Lucas, who was constantly chasing her under the pretext that he was guarding her. This pissed Selena off, plus she was very tired, which Lucas noticed. He looked at her with a smile and told the mistress that it seems that she is too exhausted. After that, the protagonist went to look for any free chair in a hurry, because it was the first time she had been on her feet for so long since she became Selena. It made her feel like she was about to fall to the floor from helplessness. But then Lucas noticed something that instantly caught his keen attention. With his violet eyes, he looked at the strange gathering of people, realizing that something interesting was about to happen. Unexpectedly for Selena, Lucas decided to abruptly distance himself from her and step aside with a smile, telling the protagonist that this is her moment and she should try her best. Selena doesn't understand what the long-haired knight means. It turns out that Lucas was talking about a large crowd of aristocrats who, noticing Selena, immediately wanted to go to her. Absolutely all the girls directed their gazes at the main character to come up to her and talk to her as soon as possible. Selena herself was very frightened that now she would have to talk not to one lady, but to a whole crowd that admires her so much. It was evident from her face that she was not jokingly frightened when a large company of aristocrats looked only at her. The main character decided to catch a glimpse of Lucas. She noticed that he was already standing at a safe distance from her, posturing as if he had nothing to do with it. The worried Selena was pissed off because Lucas bails when she needs him so badly. In addition, the lady does not understand whether her guard can behave like that. However, the excitement and thoughts of the main character about Lucas with the maids interrupted the one who wanted to personally say hello to Selena. She turned out to be a black-haired aristocrat with a yellow dress, who curtsied and told the heroine that she knew she hadn't been well lately. Selena herself decided to look at the mistress calmly, scratching her head and telling her that it wasn't all that sad, but she was still grateful to her for sharing her worries and excitement. The black-haired girl came closer to Selena and told her a little indignantly that she was of course worried about her all this time. To this, the protagonist thought that her reaction was Selena's usual reaction to this, and if it was the other way around, she was certainly sad. However, the black-haired lady, while she was talking to Selena, still had no way of understanding what had happened to her longtime friend. She looked at her with suspicion, realizing the fact that it was as if she was a different person, not the former evil Duchess. She even imagined the real Selena's real reaction if the girl had said the same words to her. She imagined in her head Selena being evil, telling her that she knew everything and only came now. The black-haired lady recalls that this was the case before, but the black-haired girl decided not to dwell on her thoughts. She approached the serious Selena with a smile and asked her if she remembered her name. The girl reminded the mistress that her name was Vivian Jonas, and she was from the Earl Jonas family of clothing sales. The heroine didn't want to talk to her, but she mouthed some words to her anyway, thinking that if Vivian was so eager to get close to her after her memory loss to be closer to mistress, she would only get an invitation to her funeral in the near future. However, Selena and Vivian's conversation was interrupted by another aristocrat who needed the protagonist badly. It turned out to be a red-haired lady with the name Mia, who introduced herself to Selena and walked towards her. All the maids who were interested in Selena, for some reason, decided to move away from Mia. Looking at Mia with her empty blue eyes, which were like an azure seashore, Selena realized that Mia was one of the main villains of the novel, because she was Selena's right hand all the time. The protagonist thought about it further, imagining Mia in her head as the former Selena, and realizing that Mia was most likely the person who was causing Selena to be evil and seems to be the reason why Selena ended up dying in the dungeon. The main character decided to be calm, looking at Mia as if she was indifferent to her. Selena poisedly apologized to Mia for possibly not remembering her due to her memory loss, calling the girl Leah afterwards. This was heard by Mia and said in bewilderment that her name was Mia, not Leah. Meanwhile, Vivian and all the other aristocrats preferred to only watch Mia and Selena. After the heroine apologized to Mia, the girl's friend told Selena that she realized that she was really sad, but she also tells the heroine not to get too upset, because soon, according to Mia, she will remember everything since they are longtime friends. Mia even turns to Vivian, waving her fan and asking if everything is as she said. Vivian very excitedly replied to the red-haired mistress that she was right, and everything would be as she said it would be. Just like she said, Mia also told Vivian, with a sly smile, that she wanted to be the first to chat with her longtime friend, whereupon she asked Vivian if she would give up her seat. Vivian anxiously replied that of course she would do it for her. The protagonist watched the whole thing and was, to put it mildly, shocked by what she saw. She was amazed that right now she would have to endure a conversation with her past best friend, whom she really hates. Meanwhile, the cunning Mia herself, like a fox, came closer to Selena, and the first thing she asked her was whether she had really lost her memory recently, or if she was up to something more interesting and devious for someone. However, the protagonist decided to abruptly and confidently take one step away from the brash Mia, calmly telling her that it seems they used to be truly close before. What is evident from Yelena is that she is not comfortable with Mia's interactions with her. The main character of the story continued talking, informing Mia the fact that she had indeed lost her memory due to her injury, so it was quite awkward for her to talk to her now. Selena herself had a look on her face as if Mia was even pissing her off. The girl's words only made Mia more anxious. When she realized that her friend was now very uncomfortable and couldn't remember anything, she told Selena that it couldn't be because they were like sisters in the past. Mia became even more worried when she turned her head and noticed that just because of Selena's words to her, all the aristocrats around her started whispering and gossiping about them, and how the heroine was humiliating Mia right in front of everyone. Then Mia remembered herself in the past with Selena, and realized that now she was just lashing out at her, even though before she was just trying to get her to trust her, always following her around like a sibling. Mia remembers how she and Selena's past self really liked to bully and make fun of the weak. They often did this together, So many aristocrats and servants had to put up with such cruelty from them. Mia also remembers very well how she used to give her friend Selena a lot of jewelry as gifts, just to actually gain her trust. Selena always liked that, so they were inseparable. On top of all this, Mia recalls saying all sorts of compliments to Selena, just to placate her and lure her in. This always pleased Selena, making her feel like a true queen and lord. However, when Mia looked at Selena, who was standing right in front of her, she realized that she had changed a lot. Mia was greatly upset that Selena was no longer the same as before, but she thinks about the fact that if she created the right atmosphere for Selena, she would immediately remember everything. Immediately after that, Mia decided to act. She covered her mouth with a fan, coquettishly telling someone that she seemed to have a severely dry mouth and most likely needed something to drink. With her index finger, she called Aiden over to her, who was standing nearby, pouring champagne for the guests. He noticed that the red-haired lady was calling him, so he hurried to follow the order. Aiden himself also recognized the protagonist's longtime best friend. He looked at her as if he didn't want to go to her at all, but he had to do it since his wishes at work don't even count. When Aiden came closer to Mia and bowed, she told him that it looked like they hadn't seen each other in a while, whereupon she called Aiden a loyal servant of Mistress Selena. Mia also asked the guy to bring her some champagne, whereupon Aiden said he would do so immediately. And while Aiden was on his way to the table with champagne and glasses, Mia decided to turn her head back to where the main character was standing and winked coquettishly as if to say that something interesting was about to happen. However, even this did not impress Selena much. She continued to stare at Mia with a stony face, not understanding why she had decided to wink at her and what she was up to if she wanted to give her back her supposedly lost memory. Meanwhile, Aiden was already fully prepared to serve the lady a glass of champagne. He, being an experienced waiter and servant already, placed the glass on a tray so that he could then serve it spectacularly to the cunning Mia. Aiden hurriedly gave Mia the glass of alcohol, but Mia only thanked him briefly, ordering him to fulfill his duties as soon as possible. So far, no one understood exactly what Mia had planned for Selena. The lady's loyal servant served the lady's glass as carefully as he could be. Only after he was sure that the glass was in Mia's hand did he stop holding it, removing his hand to the side. However, something went wrong. Suddenly, the champagne in the glass spilled over the edge, causing small and large sprays of it to rush straight at Mia. It seems that Mia did this intentionally because it's part of her plan. In the end, only a small portion of the champagne from the glass splattered Mia's shoulder with drops, but she made such a shriek and noise. It sounded like Aiden had done something worse. She wanted to purposely draw as much attention to herself as possible. Mia, who was angry at Aiden, was immediately approached by astonished aristocrats who began to marvel at the red-haired lady's stained dress and said to each other, "That Lady Mia's beautiful dress was stained." But Mia blamed Aiden for everything. She immediately started yelling at him, asking Aiden what he had done and if he even knew how much her dress cost. Aiden started bowing very low to Lady Mia, apologizing to her, even though it wasn't really his fault. Mia kept poking him with her fan, asking the guy if he thought she could forgive him for it so easily. Meanwhile, Aiden, with a sad and angry face, realized Mole so-and-so knew this is what was going to happen. After a saddened and humiliated Aiden stood up, Mia continued to poke him with her fan and grudgingly asked him if he thought she could forgive him so easily for such a horrible act towards her. However, what Mia said afterward hurt Aiden the most. The lady had told him straight in his eyes that he was only able to live up to this point because of Selena, so he must fulfill all his duties perfectly so as not to dishonor her or himself. While Aiden was already feeling shame and sadness just because of Mia, she was telling him that he must do his job perfectly, at least so that he wouldn't end up on the streets again, where he would only be selling his pretty face according to Mia. While all the aristocrats who were watching Mia humiliate Aiden were shocked at what was happening, Lucas, who was standing in the distance and heard everything, just sighed, realizing that Mia was only capable of humiliating and punishing. However, unlike everyone else who just watched the lady humiliate Aiden undeservedly, Selena couldn't just stand there and watch it all, even though she knows perfectly well that Mia is wrong. Her eyes were filled with obvious anger at her former friend, and while the protagonist already wanted to teach Mia a lesson, she kept pointing her fan at the disappointed and humiliated Aiden, asking him what he was going to do now and ordering him to do what he had to do. The red-haired lady continued to stare at Aiden with her scary and angry red eyes. She asked him if he knew what she was talking about, because she hadn't forgotten everything just because they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Aiden was silent, but he seemed to understand what Mia was telling him. His lips didn't even twitch as he prepared to be humiliated in front of all the aristocrats at the love fest for the umpteenth time. Mia loudly and clearly ordered him to kneel. Those words hit the guy's self-esteem even more, causing him to seemingly lose his emotions. He didn't look at anyone, but only felt like trash among the aristocracy. He even pressed his lip because he tried not to cry being an adult and in front of grown-up people. This is a real trauma for him, one that would have its echo in the heart of Lady Selena's loyal servant for a long time to come. Aiden was about to slowly kneel before the one who had openly humiliated him. In the meantime, he had tried many times to reach out to Mia, telling her to forgive him for being so rude and clumsy. Aiden actually realized that it wasn't his fault, but he also realized that there was no way he could prove it in front of everyone. However, Aiden still couldn't kneel before the cunning Mia, who only wished he could. A girlish hand suddenly grabbed Aiden's forearm, preventing him from kneeling before the red-haired mistress. He was even more surprised when he raised his head to look at the man who dared to do so. He immediately recognized this man as the one who had brought him here, giving him a job, warmth, and all the comforts of life. Aiden stared in surprise at the mistress, who continued to hold him by the forearm with a stone face, so that he would in no way kneel down in front of Mia. Absolutely all the aristocrats in the neighborhood were stunned. Even Mia herself was very much surprised by the behavior of her longtime friend, who used to be always in favor of humiliating someone or bullying someone. While there were other surprised ladies around Mia, she said Selena's name puzzled, not realizing what was happening to her. Also, watching this turn was Lucas, who had been silent and away from everyone the whole time. He also perfectly noticed the fact that Mia set Aiden up, because of which he looked at her with great anger. Meanwhile, the protagonist who prevented Aiden from kneeling down in front of such a horrible person like Mia, who only takes advantage of her status, calmly ordered Aiden to stand up and straighten up. At this moment, it was as if sunlight was falling on Selena, making her seem like an angel. Aiden himself was very much surprised at his mistress's words. He wanted to contradict her by politely saying that he didn't even have the right to do that if that was what the noblewoman asked of him, but he couldn't utter a word because Selena interrupted him. She didn't bother to tell him something that wasn't really his fault, but only ordered him to get off his knees and make it lively. Selena looked at Aiden in a way that made it immediately clear to everyone that she was sure of what she was saying. Only then did Aiden get off his knees with such sadness on his face that few could convey it. He stood behind Selena as she told Mia that she was so disgusted to listen to her that she thought she was going to rot. And on Mia's face were genuine emotions of shock and incomprehension. She had thought all this time that she could bring back the memory of the former, evil Selena. But that wasn't the case here. And because of that, a drop of sweat even ran down her face from the intense excitement, looking at how many guests had gathered at the party. Selena angrily told her former friend that today was the important engagement ceremony of the Duke, the eldest son of the Howite family, and the holy maiden Ariel. With a glance at Mia, the protagonist asked her why she was making a D=T fuss. After doing so, she loudly and menacingly called her a lady. Mia became very nervous, not even knowing what to say in such a situation when she was already being humiliated in front of everyone. Mia looked frightened and humiliated at her former friend, who was defending her servant right now. The red-haired girl asked her if Selena really thought she was making an unnecessary fuss here. Then the girl decided to protect herself. She shouted to Selena that she herself saw perfectly well that she was a victim, since Aiden himself spilled champagne on her dress, after which she made him apologize for it. However, the protagonist can no longer be persuaded because she knows the truth. Selena, pointing to her face, told Mia that she had seen her spill champagne on herself and that she had probably done it because she hadn't noticed that the drink was about to spill out of the glass. Those words made Mia panic even more. She realized that Selena knew the truth perfectly well and she was not so easily fooled. This made Mia feel even more scared. She started talking like this, as if she didn't understand anything, asking the heroine what she was telling her. Then the protagonist held out her hand and said that they'd better listen to the comments of the other ladies who witnessed the event. Immediately after the main character's words, many of the girls said that they had indeed witnessed the way Mia herself had spilled champagne on her dress. Looking at every girl around her, which only confirmed Selena's words that Mia had done all this on purpose, Mia realized that she could not get out of this shameful situation, as many people knew the truth. The dreadful thoughts began to haunt Mia even more, who, with each passing second, only felt even more humiliated than Aiden himself, whom she was so eager to make look guilty for something he didn't do. It was then that Mia realized that Selena wasn't going to play by her rules so easily. She made the decision to lash out at the main character and whisper to her why she was doing this to her when she used to hate everyone but her. With her distraught eyes, the girl looked at Selena and told her to remember the fact that Aiden used to be her toy and she used to abuse him herself, just like Mia was doing now. The red-haired girl asked Selena if she didn't remember that. However, the protagonist was wearing only emotions of frustration, emptiness, and anger at her former friend, who was trying to find something in her that was long gone. Mia held her forearms and told her that this was completely unlike her, like she was a different person. To this, a calm Selena told her former friend that she would no longer remember what it was like before the trauma, as she had said it herself earlier. After that, she once again asked Mia if it was necessary to behave like that, and at an important celebration. Meanwhile, Aiden was still standing next to Selena, wondering why the protagonist still wanted to protect him. He listened in amazement as Selena told Mia that she would even charge her for ruining such a good party. Mia was telling the heroine that she didn't understand what she was telling her. Mia was already shaking with fear and embarrassment in front of everyone. She anxiously told Selena that they used to be real friends after all, after which she suggested that if she gave her memory back to her, she would definitely become the same as she was. The red-haired girl continued to convince Selena that she was wrong, and she just lost her memory, but the protagonist already realized that there was no point in talking to Mia, because she would always talk about her own. Realizing all this, the protagonist decided to touch Mia's hand, which was holding her forearm, going to do something sharp. Selena asked Mia if it was true that they were friends earlier. The protagonist then slapped Mia's arm sharply and hard, causing her to no longer hold her by the shoulders. Glaring at her former friend, the girl said that in that case, they wouldn't even be considered acquaintances. Selena stared intently at Mia with her blue eyes that seemed to glow in the shadows of her face, telling the disappointed Mia that from now on, she wouldn't even have a chance to connect with her. Saying this loudly, the protagonist decided to finish Mia off with words, addressing her with the wrong name and showing everyone that she didn't even remember what her name was. This finally disappointed Mia, causing her to look at Selena in surprise, realizing that this was the biggest embarrassment of her life. Meanwhile, Lucas had been watching Mrs. Selena humiliate her former and insolent friend in full view of everyone. It made him smile widely, as if he was satisfied that Mia was getting what she deserved. Lucas, who was clearly surprised and pleased with the situation, decided not to stand on the sidelines anymore, but to approach Selena and Aiden, causing his high leg to step next to the main character's dress. He walked closer to Selena, causing not only her, but also Mia to pay attention to him. Lucas looked at the main character and apologized before saying something important to her. He approached Selena in order to tell her to go back since she was starting to look bad. Lucas also looked suspiciously at Mia, showing her the fact that he also has a strange opinion towards her. The mere sight of the protagonist's security guard made Mia truly afraid. She realized that even Lucas now knew that she was a liar and a terrible person, which now made her feel really bad. Touching her face, the girl explained the words of Lucas that he really wanted to attend the wedding of his brother and the holy maiden Ariel. But unfortunately, according to the heroine, she cannot be here for a long time because of poor health. Lucas immediately told the protagonist that this is terrible, and in that case, he will walk her to her room himself. While Selena's guard offered her to grasp his hand, the heroine herself told Lucas that she was fine with that. But the protagonist was in no hurry to go with Lucas to her room just yet. Before leaving the party, she called Aiden, from which he became agitated, asking the mistress what she wanted from him. Turns out Selena wanted to tell Aiden to go along with them. She did so, gesturing with her hand, and already striding in hall accompanied by Lucas. There was very little emotion on her face, but it had become a normal thing for everyone by now. However, Selena's words made Aiden freeze for a moment and look at the heroine as if she was a true savior to him, which she was. He continued to stare at the girl, unable to believe that someone had stood up for him. The protagonist even held out her hand to her loyal servant, asking him why he was frozen there and ordering him to hurry up and follow her so he wouldn't linger here. But for Aiden, this was a very important moment in his life. For him, it was a very important moment in his life, for the reason that he remembered very well those moments when, as a young child, little Selena had also reached out to him when he was loitering on the streets. He looked at the main character and remembered those moments of childhood. He vividly remembered how Selena's hand had appeared in front of his battered face when he had been beaten by everyone. He had marveled greatly at the kindness of Mistress then, and now he felt the same emotions, just like that day. With such pleasant thoughts, he grabbed the hand of the main character of the story, because that was the only decision he thought was right. He graciously squeezed her palm, telling her that he would gladly go with her wherever she went. Then he heard the most cherished words from her, the words he considered the sweetest of his life. Selena looked at him with her sky-blue eyes and told him that only she was his mistress, not anyone else. Because of this, he looked at Selena like this, as if she was his lover. A cute smile appeared on Aiden's face, causing his face to almost glow with happiness. He wished he could only look at the main character. As Aiden admired his mistress, the protagonist herself told him that you shouldn't always kneel down, following someone else's example when you're like a fool carrying drinks to others. Lucas was still standing beside them. Aiden couldn't even take his eyes off the main character. He admired her beauty with kind, sincere eyes, telling her he didn't expect this from her. It was truly a pleasant surprise for Aiden. Noticing that Aiden was in no hurry to follow her, the protagonist of the story decided to apply the status system to their conversation. She told Aiden if he was going to ignore the orders of the person with the highest status, including the Duke's family, if he was so not going to follow her. Absolutely all the guests continued to stare in amazement at everything that was going on. They also looked admiringly at Mrs. Selena, who used her status to put the cunning Mia in her place. Then she turned to everyone, including her former friend, and said a mysterious but surely very important phrase to everyone present. The girl told all the aristocrats that a tangerine was not a tangerine. After that, each of the guests, including Mia, who was looking at Selena with astonishment, couldn't understand what she meant by saying such incomprehensible words before she left. For a moment, everyone fell silent, waiting for something more. The main character, noticing that everyone didn't understand her words, just shrugged her shoulders, already getting ready to leave. She thought about the fact that she only said it to cheer up each guest so they wouldn't be sad to see her go. The very first guest to laugh was one of the aristocrats, who was laughing more not from the main character's phrase, but because of Mia, who continued to stand shamefully right in the middle of the hall like a main exhibit.